my house and hunt. I always enjoyed that, those weekends, where they'd take a week or 2 weeks and go up to the lake. And, now instead they're at my house all the time.
No, there's no, you don't have to.
They don't have to travel, yeah. And my nephew, when he first started, so he was 15, at 14 and 15, I think he sat and stand with my husband. And then 16, he went out on his own, and I said, now this is not real hunting. It's not like your dad did and grandpa did and all that. Sun up, he knocks down at 8, comes in, and I said, well, this is unusual. He did that 3 years in a row, he got an 8, a 10, and an 8.
Wow.
And he goes, you keep telling me that's not normal, but look what's happening. This year they haven't really seen much.
Hello, how are you? On the speaker, we're better.
Good.
Well, I'm not gonna say we're good. I'm just gonna say better until we get into it.
When I started hunting, you gotta just kind of go somewhere.
Well, they look like they were all lit up like a Christmas tree. That one that I put back is.
This one here? Okay, now this one. Yeah.
I see nothing but what you got in your packet, which is my stuff.
Oh, you know.
Right.
Just in the bottom, without even having elevations or anything. I don't know.
No. People see it.
The only thing that said in there was architect by owner, or engineer by owner. Yeah, and so the plans say it would be engineered by owner, so that means architect, engineering. I didn't see engineering report on that, so I can speculate it's true.
Oh, okay.
Well, problem is, combat.
Wait. Either way.
So I think I emailed Ellen, and I can't remember if I'm looking, well, on a different one, I'm looking for the contract.
Okay, yeah, and, that put me on, I guess it was me, I got it in there, 6:30, but I couldn't find it. They couldn't find it. So today I got a 2019.
Oh, okay,
So,
perfect.
I put that on there.
Yeah, and you just need to know who we want our staff.
Well,
Yes, she's
I understand. It's been a little unusual.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, okay, well, I'll just let them know right now to just do that. Your goal, and then
I don't think it is.
whenever the other, the 2019 one is executed, would it be possible to get a copy?
It'll take a little while, but don't worry, I made sense.
Yeah, no worries, that way at least they have something to look at and reference if they need to. What's my, you set a clock for me before, just tell me what number you want me to get, and I'll work on it.
It's
Pretty easy.
and we'll just close it, you can start by,
Is there any question?
Just get it going right there.
yeah, I'm seeing. That's kind of, oh, which one? Oh, sorry about that. This one.
Congratulations. Do your sentence.
A couple people say, you know, you still wanna do it? I guess you got my vote.
Is that all? Just try to fully engage with parents. Actually, it was just over to, on the highway the other day, I'd only been in as far as the shop. In the very front entryway, once they remodeled it. And, went over there the other day, and got through with, I was impressed with, you know, obviously where the old shop was, where the fleet services, and now the new one is really all in the same. Very nice. They did a nice job when they remodeled it. Hey, Randy. Evening. Hi. Don't know if we ever met. I'm Shane. Wayne Heath. Oh, good to meet you. Sheriff's Office. We met once, but it might have been a while. So yeah, I'm easy to forget. That's okay.
This is the, canvassing board, and we'll convene that, I think, our regular session and close that. I'm not sure you can do it within, they call it canvassing board, so. Canvass is separate.
Take up a new hobby? She got a blast, that was the only thing, that was just etched in their mind, that I ate that whole hot dog for something to eat. But no, we'll send stick out in our hat. Since then, we've learned how to start a fire. Now that doesn't ever have to happen. You have the power. So. We're with you in spirit.
Call our meeting to order. And on your microphones, we're going to start with the canvassing. We convene our local election canvassing board to announce the official results of the recent election. And we have a resolution, number 2018-55, certifying the results of the 11/06/18 local election. Be it resolved, the City Council of the City of Nowthen hereby certifies the following results of the November 6, 2018 local election. For the office of mayor, Jeff Pilon received 1,271 votes. Kelly Perro received 982 votes, and there were 5 write-in votes. Jeff Pilon was declared mayor. City Council, Joel Greenberg received 1,278 votes. Linda Blake received 9,004 votes. 904 votes, sorry. Troy Bednarz received 785 votes. Paul Rickard received 630 votes, and there were 15 write-ins. Joel Greenberg and Linda M. Blake were determined to be the City Council electees. So adopted on the 13th day of November 2018.
I move that we accept this resolution.
A motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And we close the canvassing board. And we will open our city council meeting. And if you would join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for joining us. It's November 13th, 2018, 7 o'clock, Tuesday night, and our regular city council meeting. The agenda as printed here or amended as follows will be followed. So all necessary and needed actions by the council will be addressed. The agenda can be amended by proper motion for discussion items only. Business from the floor is welcome and allotted for an agenda. There's a sign-in sheet in the back if you want to address something that's not on our agenda. When comments are made from the floor, you must first be recognized by myself. Second, you would state your name, your address for our records at the podium, obviously. And you'll have no more than 3 minutes to state your comments or your concerns. There are copies of the agenda available in the back of the room if you need to see what we're talking about here. And if you haven't signed in yet, please sign in the back so we take attendance at these meetings. And please either turn off your cell phones or turn them to silent. All right, I will accept a motion to approve or amend tonight's agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
I have some items in the consent agenda that I would like to either just ask questions about or move to council items. And they are items B, D, E, I, J, and K.
Slow down a little bit. B,
B, D is in David, E, I, J, and K.
I think it's probably best to then move those to council items.
So then they would be items E through J. And I have one item to add under introduction of new items, maybe requesting council direction in regards to council salary structure.
All right. So we have a motion to amend. Do we have a second? Any other discussion on the agenda? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, we will accept the sheriff's report from Commander Heath.
All right, good evening, everyone. Just wanted to give the council and citizens an update for October of 2018. During the month, sheriff's deputies responded to 121 calls for service. And for just year-to-date numbers, that's 1,205 calls for service throughout the year, which is right on par, actually a little bit below where we were in 2017 at the same time. We still continue to see some issues with theft. Again, if people unfortunately are not securing their items well, people who are looking for things to steal are doing it. During the month, we had several theft calls. Just one that was of interest to me that I wanted to point out was we had a call in the 5300 block of 199th Avenue of what was thought to be an attempted theft of a vehicle. While our deputies were responding, the suspect vehicle left, and another deputy that was coming up to the location found it, stopped it, and located two people inside. And what had been occurring is the occupants of that vehicle had been going through vehicles and stealing things. And they found the evidence of that. The two people were cited for motor vehicle tampering and the theft, both misdemeanors, which was as extensive as they could get, but non-now-then residents coming here and just looking for targets of opportunity. So again, we just try to remind people, unfortunately, if you have something of value, you have to protect it, because there's just people that come in and are looking for simple, easy targets to take your stuff. Everybody works hard for what they have, so do whatever you can to protect it. And just on a interesting note for me, you see the scruffy facial hair look for me. That's not a common thing. I've been doing this. I'm in my 27th year of law enforcement, and I've never had facial hair like this. One of our deputies came up with the idea this year to try to raise some funds, and he had chosen a particular fund, the Testicular Cancer Foundation, and we've had some staff members that have had issues and utilized that. So he actually put together a PowerPoint and a presentation and presented it to the sheriff, including photos of great men in history who've had beards and things of that nature. It was actually very fun. So the sheriff signed off on it, and we have about 50 people participating from our staff, and we've raised over $3,000 for the fund. So it's just one of those things. During the month of November, if you see some of our deputies or detectives or other male staff, they might have beards for the first time. So just one of those things. And it's been an interesting conversation starter. A lot of people that I've known forever will walk up, you know, what's wrong? How come you're not shaving? I like to joke a little bit and have a good time and tell them that my razor's broken, and that gets them to think for a second, but then we go into the story of why. So it's been a good thing. It's been very interesting to spur some conversation with people.
So is the sheriff participating?
He is.
Is he?
And if you watch our Facebook page, we've told people we would do a weekly update in the first week. You know, it's obvious some people can grow beards very well, and others like myself are a little more challenged when it comes to that. But it's still been fun nonetheless. So it's on our Facebook page, and we'll have a update coming up this Thursday or Friday. So we'll do that just through the month of November. So that's all I have. Anybody have any questions?
Council have any questions for the commander? Thank you very much. All right, we have no floor items tonight, so we will,
With Mr. Lee Stewart that signed.
yeah, no floor items for sign up here. We
No
do have,
names, yeah.
first item on the list is Mr. Lee Stewart requesting reimbursement of fees. Is Mr. Stewart here?
I did call, left a message on his phone today.
Well, I'm assuming the council has looked into the matter, looked into the documentation that staff has provided. Does council have any comments? Staff is recommending not to reimburse.
Mr. Mayor,
Leonard Stockman.
I'd just like to note that I did reduce the escrow amount for Mr. Stewart back in 2015 from 1,000 down to 500. So the total he submitted at application was $980. I went through my billing and only found 632 or thereabout dollars that was my time. And then he had a $90 building permit fee, which wouldn't be refunded. So I'm not sure where he's coming up with his totals.
I just looked, those were my totals, and I just looked at the accounting that was presented to me about.
Okay, so maybe, I don't know, I actually came in to look for the file and you have the file.
Yeah,
Anyways, but
yeah, I
it's,
have it right there. If you'd like.
I don't know what else to put down there.
I mean, there's recordings, fees, there's legal fees, probably, maybe, I don't know who.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't think the engineer would look at that.
Originally have a show a payment of $980, and then $133.72. Planning fee I listed $63.50 and $72. Base fee of $200, public hearing fee of $250, and recording fee of $30. I think pretty well gets us to that point now.
So from the council standpoint, this happened in May, June of 2015. Council decided in August of 2016 to amend the ordinance after public hearing. Anybody see any justification to reimburse whatever the established amount would be? Obviously, there are certain fees that aren't reimbursable for,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bettinger.
I'll make a motion to deny the refund as recommended by staff.
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, planning and zoning. Looking at the lot split in the CUP for Josh Peterson. And Michael and Lanny Hollenbeck. 8335 and 8359 Viking Boulevard. Councilmember Bryan.
Make a motion to approve the lot, the page on that lot split and the conditional use permit based on the findings presented at planning and zoning.
Have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
At the planning and zoning meeting, there was a lot of discussion as to the appearance of the buildings and the meeting the specs for, as the ordinance calls out for. And I was wondering to try to help with, there was going to be brick on the ends. Is that my memory correct?
Yep, that's correct. On
All right.
the east side, there'd
On
be
the
a
east side of those
masonry-
ends.
a masonry facade.
So I don't know what you're looking at, if it's just solid brick wall. Is there any way to try to help in a decorative manner, maybe like do a fake window or something like that, just to, as you're driving down, so you're not just looking at 5 solid brick walls? If that would be a consideration.
There might be, some different, we call it like a ribbon, where you put a different color through, all matching earth tones, it could all be approved, but just something that would break up the monotony of it.
Yeah,
A window would be tough, in the idea that, you're not gonna, for security, it wouldn't be ideal. Aesthetically, obviously, it'd be nice, but at the same time, I don't know how to incorporate something like a window, but I definitely can mix it up with like a ribbon per se, or potentially even some you could do like the first 4 feet could be rock face, and then beyond that, you could do a actual brick, right?
and let me clarify, I don't mean an actual glass window.
Okay.
I'm thinking if you're doing brick, can you do just a brick ledge and do a different color of a window and then like a pane, that it would look just something different, and just so that we're not just looking at 5 solid walls down the edge, the end of it.
That's what, Mr. Mayor,
Planner Stockman.
Ms. Randall, that's the drawing that Mr. Peterson had submitted initially
Okay.
as an option for kind of breaking up that wall space. I don't know if that's acceptable to something similar to that.
Yeah, as long as we're not just looking at a solid brick wall, just something more decorative. At some point, as it was mentioned at planning and zoning, the nursery may no longer be there, and I'm not saying that that's in plan at all, but just something, thinking to the future of, there might be something different in that property to the east of you, and so their view of looking at those buildings would be something other than solid brick walls. Just something to consider. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve as recommended by Planning and Zoning. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Final plat approval and development agreement for Mark and Michelle Posey. Let's put this off for another month, can we? Okay, let's not. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
I would move the approval of the lot splits as presented in the findings and recommendations.
Motion and a second, discussion.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
I do have a question. In reading through what Liz provided us, we went down, okay, we have one existing lot now, and we're going to 4 lots.
No, he's actually owns 3 lots. One has his house on it.
Okay,
There are two that are vacant. One has no street access, so that's why I counted it as two existing lots.
okay,
See what I'm saying?
okay. So with that, so we're 2 lots. We're looking at 2 of the park and trail. So on the planning and zoning findings and recommendations, page 1, finding number 4. Is that, so that is 3 new lots then?
So, are you on the first page? You said?
I'm on the first page,
Of the planning zoning findings?
yep,
Yes, so 2 new lots configured from 3 lots.
okay, because ours
So,
says the result in 3 new parcels.
Well, you know, when we're talking reconfiguration, it's kind of hard to,
Okay,
explain without the graphic what's new and what's not.
okay. And I guess it's more just clarification to make sure that this is all on the same page, because on page 2, number 4, it's got $2,500 per lot times 3 new lots. That should be reading 2 new lots, correct?
Well, we really have 3 new lots, but we're only charging park and trail fees for 2.
For 2, okay, I just, all right,
Yeah, there really are 3 new lots, we're gonna have 3 new
no,
homes.
3 new homes, okay.
But because he could have received a building permit for the existing vacant piece he has now,
Okay,
that's why we're
All right.
balancing it out that way.
okay. It just didn't seem to, the verbiage didn't seem to mesh throughout the
Okay, I'll
document.
check
And
that.
so just to make sure that whatever gets recorded is correct and that he only gets charged for the 2 lots.
so there'll be 4 buildable lots, 1 with an existing house and 3 buildable lots.
Right.
And so then when we look at the agreement to pay park and trail fees
Mhm.
associated, there it says 5,000 for 2 new lots.
Yeah,
Right.
So that's why we're inconsistent, because this
Yeah.
one says 3 new lots, this one says 2 new lots.
Well, then what I should do is describe why we're doing that.
that
Yes.
would be
In
fine.
the front part of this finding,
Mhm.
because,
Yeah, you need to do that because you used the old Viking example. And people aren't necessarily gonna know that reference, so I think making it clear here and then making sure the verbiage in both those documents is consistent would be helpful.
okay, what is,
Because on the second document, which is, well, it's the next piece, is the approval of the agreement to pay the park and trail fees. Number 2 on that, you have $7,500, when it should be 5,000.
well, see, if it's planning and zoning,
Oh, down there.
No, it's,
no?
well, I,
And number 2
Number
says, should the
2.
developer not timely pay the city the $7,500 in park and trail
that should be
fees?
5. That's why I was just, I knew we had talked 5,000 was discussed at P and Z, and it just was not. So just as long as that gets cleared up so that it's correct.
See, we're saving you money.
That's
Yeah.
not- Okay, it's on my copy, but I don't know
Okay.
how it did down yours, but whatever, I
Okay.
understand and I will
Alright.
take care of it.
All right, and then, okay, yep, that's it for that one.
Okay.
Another question on C, but we'll finish B first.
All right, so with those clarifications and corrections, we have a motion to approve the final plat approval and the development agreement. Any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item C, approval of agreement to pay park and trail fees associated with the plat of Wood Duck Ponds.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Bryant.
motion to approve the, agreement to pay the park and trail plan fees associated with the plat of Wood Duck Pond, with the assumption that the amount throughout the document is $5,000.
Second.
Well, just to clarify that, because in item 2, there are some other figures on the backside, so it's not all 5,000. There's some 5,500s in there, so,
7,500
that the amounts would be properly clarified. That's, I can help there. All right. A motion and a second. Any other discussion?
I don't think there was a second.
Second.
Or did- okay, thank you.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. No road and bridge, no park and rec.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan.
motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? I will say just for the record, we have one typo. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, council items. We have the city administrator recruiting update. I think Administrator Darris, that in light of the elections, we had talked about changing the interview committee.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it makes sense to have someone that's gonna not be here on the committee. I would say that probably would make sense. I have not talked to Paul about it, and I doubt if he would disagree with that. But that would be the only caveat that we would change it, and I want to inform him. But other than that, there's not a whole lot to report. We've got just a couple of resumes, and a lot of that comes in later. A lot of the resumes come in last 2 days, last week.
All right,
So, Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
should we entertain a motion then to
Well, you'd have to rescind last month's.
rescind last month's?
Yeah,
and-
and that has to come, a motion has to come from the prevailing side on that, so that shouldn't be difficult.
I would move that we rescind the motion from the October, whatever the date was, council meeting, and replace that with a motion naming Mayor Pilon and Councilmember Bryan as the council representatives to work with Administrator Darris in regards to the hiring of an administrator.
I'll second that.
Motion and second. Discussion? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. We have a follow-up to the recycling center employee.
Yeah, I got a little bit more precise information. I was under the understanding we were replacing someone at about that amount of time. It turns out we were replacing someone that did not work a whole lot of hours per week, approximately 5, that I was able to confirm. I think it would be helpful to have someone, especially on Saturdays, to help residents, and we are seeing quite a bit more cardboard, probably, as I mentioned last week, the Amazon effect. The budget, so Joe's asked for 10 hours, increase that at $15 an hour. We have the individual, I do have his application, it was Randy Preshke, if I have that pronunciation correct. And so the budget would be $1,000, so the balance of 2018, $7,800 for 2019. And it's also part of the grant application for a reimbursement at 10 hours a week.
Now, the request said that they would be doing other things in addition to recycling. Would that affect the grant?
I think it would be occasionally where you would need a three-person crew, but yeah, it's mainly for recycling. That's where they need the help, and especially on the weekend.
So is Steve continuing to work?
Steve is gonna be done here pretty quick for the season, for this coming season. Originally, he was gonna work or wanted to work, and now he just informed me last week that he's not going to. I don't know when he's done, but it's pretty soon.
So did we count on him for any snow plowing?
I don't know. I'm sure.
Do you know, do we have our plowers in place for the year?
That's my understanding. I've not heard difference. I've asked him a couple
Have
times.
you met this?
Yes, I have.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville?
to Mr. Darris, so then if it's 10 hours a week, are we looking at, what is Joe's thought? Is it Saturday, 8 hours and 2 hours another day, or 4
No,
and
I
4?
think it's
What's
like
he-
a half day on Saturdays, but
Okay, and a
to
half,
help at other
maybe
times,
Wednesday or,
potentially, yeah. I'm not sure, I don't even know what the recycling hours are, so I mean Saturday, so
8 to 9?
8 to what?
8 to 9.
8 in the morning till 9 at night? Oh, wow.
yep, Monday through, or 7 days a week.
Oh, okay.
It's on a lock.
When somebody has a prop the door open, it's on an automatic locking
Yeah.
system.
Okay.
What we were doing before with Don Warden was, he would be there the first Saturday of the month because of the arrangement with the county for our extended funds. We had to staff the recycling center at least once a month.
Okay.
And so he would be there on Saturday mornings on the first of the month, and then he would come in and do cleanup on Sunday mornings early. So he would do baling and do a general cleanup, sort, and haul out the trash, so.
Okay.
So his was Sunday morning when nobody was around, and then Saturday once a month, first of the month, to fulfill our contract with the county.
Okay.
So I think we probably need to know that. It'd be nice to meet the guy,
Oh, okay.
the gentleman, I'm sorry. And then, and if we could have some, I would appreciate a little more definition of what would the 10 hours be if we're gonna staff on Saturday mornings again? Is that still part of the county contract? And then what the expectations would be. That kind of got to be our situation with Don. We kind of let him do what he thought was best. And so when you went over and said, here's what we're thinking should be done, it wasn't clear. So I think definition of responsibilities, hours worked, and then it'd be nice if he could come meet the council.
Okay.
Anything else on that, follow up with the employee there?
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Bryant?
It appears from the recycling budget that there's enough funds to at least address the rest of 2018 in the recycling center financial report for wages and salaries of their part-time employees.
Remember, though, we also use that to pay for, Eric and Joe and Steve when they worked there, so. And Bob, if you could find out from Steve when to send an email out on when his expected finishing for the year, and then confirm that. I think winter's upon us here. It's gonna be nice next couple of days, but I think we're in the snow season,
You're
so
right.
I want to confirm our drivers are in place.
Sure.
All right, so then there's discussion of the recycling grant application. So I'm assuming that this, referenced up above here, that there is We actually did complete a grant application,
Yep, we got it in on time.
and have we heard back on it, or is it?
Not that I am aware of, no.
So the recommendation here is to purchase a dumpster for mattresses. What would that dumpster look like? One time we had a container,
It would be a nice looking dumpster.
$5,000.
He's the
Well, we
first
had a
one.
container, we have a container here that we were gonna
Yeah.
use for mattresses at one point.
Oh,
Yeah, we purchased that.
And so I didn't know if you were actually talking about a dumpster that dumped or the container that we had.
I did not put this together, it was based on information that Ellen put into the application. I was just related that we needed a container for mattresses, but we already have a container?
We did, we purchased a container for mattresses, we just
Okay.
didn't get the grant to.
Okay, so
Proceed with
that's
it.
an easy,
Yeah.
So it does, it's probably sitting in the Public Works yard,
okay.
unless we moved it, do you know, Dan, if we move it over here?
I haven't heard if it got moved.
Because I'm thinking a dumpster, if we have a dumpster like for trash, you'd have to have a pretty big dumpster to handle many mattresses.
You would.
So I'm thinking we're probably talking a container, which we've already purchased, unless we need another one. The other expectation was when we put the addition on the building, we wouldn't need the container for that because we actually had a bay for mattresses and presumably at some point carpeting,
Okay,
so. And then the second item there is improvements to the recycling building, eliminate ice buildup. And the question I had is, we at one point had talked about putting an eyebrow out in front of the door so we didn't have the snow buildup. I think that's the one you've got there.
yeah, I've got Council Brian, mentioned that this was done back in May, and we had this building proposed, or that expansion, and the cost was $62.50 before May 1st and $66.96 after construction building. And I don't know what happened to it after that, so I'm just.
Well, at the time, that's when we found out we didn't get our grant
Oh,
from last year.
okay.
And we didn't have an understanding of our budget to know there was extra money to be available. Had we realized what you've discovered on the funds and what AEM was able to help us understand, we'd realized there was money available to put that on, we'd have done it this summer.
Okay.
I still think, so that we are able to use those doors all winter, we should look at funding that and getting, if structural can still do that this year, getting that extension put on.
Yeah.
And then, Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Bryant?
there was the one other issue that Eric pointed out, that the water will come in on the south side and then run through the building, so that the whole new addition was ice throughout the winter. So there was the two issues to theoretically, to possibly address. So I don't know how that second one, if that second one can be addressed together with the eyebrow or not.
You know, I would certainly think so. You know, Joe had mentioned something last year about the snow piling up on the south side. I didn't realize it was icing over inside. But yeah, if we're gonna have functionality in the building, we need to not have an ice rink in there and be able to open up the doors. Otherwise, we paid a lot of money for non-usable buildings. So I don't know what the issue is. We do have dirt on the south side of the building, and if the snow is coming off the roof, if there's a way of trenching or sealing up that south side so it runs off to the east, would be something that should be
sure.
investigated.
Seems like something that, unless it's a real big issue that a public works crew could probably do. I don't know how difficult it is, but
Well,
preventing it is either a grade or a ceiling issue, and neither of those, I don't think are, how long of a stretch is.
It was pretty much the extent of the
The new
addition
addition.
that you can
And
see
how-
the gap through by 30
Okay, yeah. So I would think we could probably handle that. but-
So I would move that council direct Administrator Darris to work with staff on remedying the issue on the south side of the building and the water seepage. And then secondarily contact structural to see if there was time yet this year to fix the north side of the building and what the cost would be.
I'll second that.
The only question I would have is what, if they can do that and they can do it for that price, would we want to just go ahead and do it?
Yes. And I would say probably with steel being what it is, I would say, my motion would be 7,000 or under.
Okay.
They were at 66. So they could do it for 7,000, and
All right.
Bob would be authorized to do it. Still second that? Any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville?
I just want to, did we jump down to the recycling grant application, the dumpster and the building repairs. Did we ever make a decision on the recycling center employee?
Yes. Bob's going to follow up with
We're
specifics.
Coming back to the next meeting.
It's going to come back.
Come back, okay. I missed
Specifics of
this.
duties,
Okay.
hours, and
All right, okay.
have the gentleman come in and meet us.
All right, I just don't remember hearing a motion on that, though. Just direction. All right, thank you.
All right, any other discussion on the fixing of the building? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, and then we have leadership training for newly elected officials. I believe, do we have both of our newly elected council members here? So Linda Blake and Joel Greenberg, welcome.
There's some good leadership training sessions. Usually right after the first of the year, the League of Cities puts on a newly elected officials training. And there's a variety of trainings, online trainings. Take a look at the League of Minnesota Cities website. Worth taking a look at it. And I have an orientation kind of thing that if you wanted to stop in, or if the council wanted, we could put it on maybe in the January meeting and kind of go over it. Just kind of sets some of the expectations. Often there's a lot of questions. What does a council person do? And so we'll cover some of those things. But League of Cities is really helpful for newly elected people. There's a variety of trainings.
LMC is what you'll want to be looking at, League of Minnesota Cities. They also have a handbook that we have copies of in the office. And there's a mayor's handbook, so you can see what's expected of the mayor as well. So.
Mr. Mayor?
And don't start too late in the night reading it, because it's not the most exciting reading. But it is very thorough. They have done a lot of research and present very well. Councilmember Rainville.
One of the things I was thinking about, and I forgot to ask the sheriff, is a couple years back, the sheriff's office did a really nice orientation as to what does the sheriff's office do for the communities. And I'm wondering if Mr. Dares could reach out and ask them if they're going to offer that again this year. Sure. It was, I think, on a Saturday they did that.
Any other information on the newly elected officials? You will obviously have opportunities between now and January. And you'll be given more information as far as swearing in and start of your official duties. But certainly between now and then, there's a lot of research you can do on your own and with the assistance of the League of Minnesota Cities. So you can reach out to Bob in the office or council members as you feel needs. Thank you for serving. All right, we're going to go to the items moved down from the consent agenda. And starting with item B, the financial report.
Mr. Mayor, just a question in going through the report, one of the things I've noticed has been missing is we used to receive a sheet that told us the council salaries and the employee salaries, the payroll periods, the check numbers, I'm not seeing that, and I don't see it in the claims. So I'm just wondering, where is that in our financial piece? Where do we,
Yeah, I will check with Ellen, and we'll include that in the future.
okay. I would move then, with the item E on the council items.
Financial.
We'd accept the financial report then.
Second? Motion and second. Any other discussion?
That's it. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan?
I'm assuming that's including the claims. as
Yeah.
well as the necessary-
Everything under
So,
B.
so things that were B that are now council items E,
Yeah.
Great.
so all of B. Any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bettinger?
I noticed there's been some transfers made on, the equipment fund and the road improvement fund, and it looks like they moved half of what was budgeted for the year in each one of the funds she transferred.
Yeah, I think that was done by Mike Hofall. And,
Ellen, I think that.
but I mean, based on his advice, he came in and split out the
I didn't hear the question.
But
Mike is here.
at this point, the whole year's budget should have been moved, because the first half, didn't it, she only did half, or whoever.
Well, we don't get the second
Yeah.
half taxes till December. That's when.
They usually move the second half in December.
Okay.
Any other questions on the treasury report, claims, and net distribution? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item D on the consent agenda, item F on the council items.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Rainville.
Under the consent agenda, item D, it said that there was also included a one-page description.
I'm sorry,
And
I see that I missed that tonight, and I
Okay.
can send it out. It's just there's an automatic work comp coverage for any volunteer, which you may or may not be aware of, but I'll email that out.
All right, then I would move council item F, which is previous council consent item D.
Second.
Motion is second. Any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Consent item E. This is the,
Fire station. Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Rainville.
I'm not comfortable, I understand the need for the expansion, that's not an issue with me. I'm just uncomfortable with the lack of information that we have here. And one of the reasons I'm uncomfortable, we've already talked about in regards to the issues we're having at the recycling center, when this is the same contractor that did the recycling center. So I think without more detailed information, I can't move forward with this.
That's-
With the
that's
understanding
fine.
that I
Actually,
understand that the need for it.
Chief
Coner.
Coner was planning to be here tonight. He had a work session at Ramsey that he had to attend, so he was unable to come. And so I think we should just table that for a month.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we were looking at was plan elevation and overall siting, because if we are having trouble getting in and out of the recycling center, we need to make sure that we take into consideration all the uses of that area. If there's something we can do to go further north-south and we just have to figure that out, so. So you'll get with Chief Coner and.
Yeah, and again, I thought this was more progressed than I think is the understanding here. And I
Yeah.
apologize for that. It just sounded like it was done deal. Everybody had kind of agreed to the finance plan and everything like that.
Yeah, we're not sure what we're getting at this point. And I agree with the idea, if it's structural buildings, I want to make sure that we don't have oversights like we saw. Again, you've got a fire department, if your door's on the north side, you want to make sure you don't have snow piling up in front of your doors. And we should have seen that on the recycling center, but certainly people building that, we should have alerted us to it, because,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bettinger.
I think we need to check into, because I'm pretty sure it needs to be done, it needs to be signed off by an architect and a mechanical engineer for inside the building. And if them costs aren't included with what we have here today, then we would need to find out what that's gonna cost.
It does say in special requirements, civil engineering by the owner, so that's our cost.
But civil engineer is different than an architectural sign-off plan.
Yep. And I didn't see that on here, so.
I think you might be right.
I know, because when we built that building, we tried to do it without. One of the contractors that bid on it caught it. So then we had to start all over and have an architect do the plan, sign off, and have a mechanical engineer sign off on the heating and ventilation system, and so. You could try to get by with it, and you might, but
Yeah, some more.
Well, and obviously, if you're adding showers and bathrooms and, I don't know if they're gonna change anything on the washer, but you gotta make sure the septic is sized up properly as well. So a little bit of work to do on that one.
Sounds like, I don't think we'll be able to stick with our finance plan by the sound of it. I mean, for a little bit in this year's, we can always transfer money from 2018 to 19. Okay,
All right?
all right, and Chief Coner said we can make it next month.
Okay.
We maybe table that?
Motion to table.
second.
All right, we have a motion. All those in favor?
I,
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item I. Authorize the city attorney to prepare fire service charge ordinance amendment.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
I guess I'm not clear, are we looking to vote up or down this
No.
ordinance as,
No,
Okay.
this is just showing, what will be eliminated, although, I spoke with the mayor this afternoon, and there are a couple of things that we have to eliminate those parts of the deleted text that reference H, I, and J.
okay,
So with that correction, we would send it then over to Bob Ruth. The problem I was starting to run into is what other things may be impacted in the code, and it wasn't a standalone ordinance. It was one of those where it's like, I think I better just have the attorney do it.
I would just comment that the residents that have contacted me in regards to the changes are not in favor of waiving fees. They are, like with the planner and the building official, if they're not using those services, they don't want to be paying for them. They understand that in public safety, there are some general costs that are associated with having a fire department, but they don't want to pay the fees for when somebody else's house burns down or a commercial building goes down. That's the feedback I've gotten from residents.
One of the things that might be helpful, Bob, would be to, we talked about this in general, but actually to document what have we actually collected in fees? Because I really don't know that that's been a major part of our fire budget.
Well, it has, and it's been about $5,000.
Yeah, so if we could just capture that for the last couple of years, saying here's here's the activity we've had and what we've actually charged and collected. I think, you know, the main thing we agreed on originally was, you know, short of the items which are H, I, and J, which is underground utility breaks, hazardous materials, and illegal activities, if those are still in play, there's gonna be charges.
Right.
But the other ones, you know, if we can take a look and say, we're talking about a $5,000 or whatever the actual numbers would be, I think that certainly would help. But, and I think at this point, we go with what we directed before, clean this up,
Yeah.
give it to Bob, and then we can debate the final.
That's kind of the recommendation that I had put forth tonight.
And so
But
if we have the
there's a question on whether
supporting
we want to do that, that's-
financial impact, that would be the one last piece. Yes, okay, so the motion would be to
I-
clean up, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Motion to clean up this document as discussed, to keep items H, I, and J as active parts of this document, and then submit that cleaned up document to the attorney for final preparation of the amended ordinance.
Second.
Motion second, discussion.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
I would like to see if Bob can determine whether or not we can leave in it, if there is the possibility of being reimbursed by vehicle insurance, health, you know, whatever method of reimbursement, that we are still able to avail ourselves to getting reimbursed, if that is a possibility.
The idea that most homeowners' policies have fire call reimbursement.
And if you're driving, your vehicle should be covered, and I just don't want to lose the ability to be reimbursed for fees that we could still be reimbursed for.
I'll answer.
If that were the case, I would believe you'd want to keep it to whatever the standard is, rather, we'd moved it up because people could get extra coverage. But I think if there's something that's standard, if it's available, how do we avail ourselves of it? Okay. Anything else for discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Who made that motion
I did,
and second?
Dan.
Thank you.
Item J, Joint Anoka County Economic Development Partnership.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainey.
I would ask to table this, and during discussion, I would explain why.
You have a motion to table? And actually, if you're tabling, there's no discussion, it's tabled.
Okay.
So
Well, then, how do we get what I
it would
want?
be tabled, so what, you have something that you want to ask on this? Is that what you're?
Yes. I understand the value of economic development. I just am concerned that there's not much information here. The memorandum of understanding isn't there, the exhibits, all of the attachments are missing. And I would like to see those attachments before I go ahead and vote for this. I worry about expenses down the road. You know, it's not much to get into it now, I agree to that. But what are potential expenses down the road? They've hired somebody from the county, they've talked about a budget. You know, what could our
I would say the
exposures be?
$261 doesn't seem like much now, but I would say that that's kind of what we thought when we first got the communication system, and that thing has morphed into all kinds of staff and all kinds of costs, and every year it goes up thousands of dollars. So I understand based on some of the other county practices that
I'm leery,
we've been lowballed, not intentionally, but
yeah.
it turns out it didn't work out the way they initially thought, and the public safety data, public safety data system
I'll
is.
just have, staffer come out and give you a presentation, I think that's probably.
And if we could have the,
Honestly, I would have, you know, in a normal situation where I'm, you know, a staff city administrator, I'd say, yeah, I mean, I do that in my budget. $250 is a very inexpensive thing, but I realize there's those kinds of things. The other thing is we really haven't done economic development as a stated intentional kind of policy, which I can tell you other cities are doing that, and they're you know, really focused on trying to improve and bring in new businesses, retain existing businesses, and we're gonna have to be, we're gonna have to get involved with, you know, things like this. There's other groups that are very active. And trying to figure out when there are such things like this, it's nice to have a resource at the county where we can go and they can package the deed and the whatever loans might be available through the county HRA. So
Jackie has spoken at the local government officials meeting, so this has been presented from the local government officials
Oh, yes, okay.
standpoint. It's just the attachments would be nice to have.
yeah, and I have them on my desk. I made the decision. It just didn't look like something
And,
that would be.
and just because we had a presentation for a very low cost, very reasonable public safety data system, and it sounded super when it came in. And we now have an IT administrator, an assistant, we have program director, we have 3 or 4 separate entities now, where it's all gonna be one. I mean, it's morphed into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And
Where do we pay that?
it's in our budget. It's a PSDS, county PSDS, Public Safety Data System. And our portion of it is, again, it's portioned out by usage and population. But probably would be good to have Jackie out here. She's very assertive, she's very congenial, but she's focused. Probably Kevin can come out. And she's persistent. I get emails at work from her all the time.
Okay,
All right? Was there a motion on that, or did we just,
Yes,
there wasn't.
all right,
myself and Dan.
and the motion was
Table.
table? Oh, yeah, right here. All right, all those in favor of the motion? Aye, opposed, motion carries. Aye, let's see, now we're down to K.
Okay, which is the financial procedures and controls policies. The question I have on this, and it's minor, but I just want to address it, is that we continue in here to use an existing term of, position term, the clerk treasurer. And should that be reflected to an administrator? We do have deputy clerk in there also. I don't know if it's that big of a deal.
Say something can be cleaned up at the appropriate
I
time.
think the
Okay.
more important thing is to get the policy
Get the po-
controls
okay.
in place.
And then-
Because right now, that's what we're still operating under, so.
Yep. Okay.
So, but we do want the policy in place, so.
Alright. Yeah, the policy's fine, I just was wondering. Okay. All right, so I would move that we accept what was consent item K and is now council item J,
Resolution 2018-53.
2018-53.
Second.
Motion and second, any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Patton.
on the, I guess it'd be the second page, under payroll, there's a typo there.
Yeah, I've shown that to Bob. You got the same
Or are you
type.
trying to make a statement?
Oh,
This
okay,
typo.
yeah. B,
Yeah,
With a B.
okay.
well,
You guys catch typos, I have to tell you.
I'm talking, on the
Oh,
top,
yeah,
disbursements is to safeguard the,
Is there
Oh, yeah, okay, the second,
The-
the second word,
assets?
good one.
Maybe
and I
that
missed
wasn't
my
a
button.
typo.
That was Freudian, that
well,
one.
I'm not, is it a typo or were you trying to make a statement?
Yeah.
I got the little one, the big one.
Yeah. But I have a question too, under the segregation of duties under procedures, letter F. Cash be deposited in the city bank account on a weekly basis unless there are not significant enough funds to warrant a deposit. Do we have a dollar amount? What is not significant? Is that
Well,
that something
you know,
that
I
should
mean-
be spelled out or not? If it
I mean, we
doesn't,
have petty cash of $100, I think
Okay.
that would be pretty much whenever you have cash, you wanna get
Get rid of it,
and a lot of places are depositing daily or trying to. And then, I think it might change now that we have our credit card up and running, we may
Okay.
have
That's
dealing
up and
with a lot
running?
less cash, so.
okay.
So it is functioning now, the credit
Yeah,
card?
yeah, Dan is really helpful. I think he,
I used it, I'll use it again tomorrow.
So if I didn't have cash on me, I wanna go pay for my appliance I'm bringing up, I can use my credit card now?
Yes.
Wow.
You can pay for what?
Appliances I'm dropping off the recycling center.
Appliances, okay, they said plants, I'm thinking, what
No,
is something?
appliances.
Okay,
I was gonna bring it up the other day and I didn't have
Yeah.
$10 on me.
yeah.
did we vote on that last?
We did not. So all those in favor, yeah, the 2018-53, all those in favor?
Right.
Aye. Opposed, motion carries. All right, and you had one more item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would like to
Councilmember Rainville.
ask for direction from council to meet with Administrator Darris to discuss current ordinance 2016-02, which is pertaining to city council salaries.
I'll second for discussion.
Motion and a second.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
I have been uncomfortable with the way that we changed that back in 16. I would like to have a conversation with Mr. Darris to see if we can go back to what we originally were at, that we were paid for attendance at a meeting, that the outside meetings that we are eligible to attend, like local government officials, League of Minnesota Cities meetings, that also if those, if the council members incurred costs associated with parking, meals, mileage, that they would be reimbursed those funds.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Pettinger.
I think you have plenty of time to work on this, because if you pass a new ordinance, it actually cannot go into effect until after the next election. So the salary for the next 2 years, you're stuck with what's in the ordinance
I
today.
think you might be right there.
Yeah,
But we can meet and talk about it.
yes.
Well, why don't we just, you guys, if.
Yeah,
you approve
I
it-
can give you a little report too. And there's a salary survey on the League of Cities that can show what other cities around our size are doing.
So the request is for Councilmember Rainville to meet with Administrator Darris to discuss options and,
Just so, I mean, you can just come in.
Okay.
I mean, there's no problem even with me. I don't know unless there's a policy that you have to have authorization.
oh, we've learned to cover ourselves that way, so. But if the council has no problem with Councilmember Rainville going and talking with the
Very
administrator.
comfortable with that. I've never had a policy like that I've worked under, so people stop in, you know, you gotta be able to talk to
All right.
them. And, so, yeah, no, just stop in and I can prepare some kind of report and things. Yeah. Thanks.
Councilmember Bryan.
Motion adjourned. You making a meeting?
All right. And I'll second that. So the regular meeting is adjourned at 8:10. You have to be home at 8:30 or leave at 8:30?
I should be home at 8:30.
All right.
I'll go a little longer.
So now open the workshop. November 13th, 2018. 8:10 PM. We have an agenda here. Does anybody want to make an amendment to the agenda? We'll take that as a no. Let Mary get back from her break. Anybody else need a break?
You already know?
But can I keep this?
Yes.
Then I'll definitely.
Which one's that?
Dan Wilson.
Oh, yep. Can we sign this one here?
These were in the bag, but sometimes some cities are how it's like, oh, you got an extra pen? Sometimes well, I always have two. And, my first meeting here.
Do you have our sign off for this? Usually a cover sheet that we all initial.
I don't recall seeing that.
I went in the packet.
There's one. And these are all set?
Those are, I gotta still do these.
Oh.
All right. Workshop. 2019 goals, I think you said we're gonna table that one.
Yeah, I think we'll want to bring in the new council people into that process, so probably cool. Probably will spill into the new year, just the way goals work. Usually you're talking about 2019 goal, well, we are talking 2019, so. I just wanted to make sure that we had that process going before I was gonna exit out of the picture, because I do really believe in them, and have found a lot of success. Okay, we'll just hold off. Probably just a brief discussion at the next meeting as well.
Yes, Mayor.
Councilmember Rainville?
To Mr. Darrows, would it be appropriate to ask that you contact the new council members and talk to them about what they think their
Oh, yeah, I'll
goals
be
are?
talking to them about lots of stuff, yeah, including that, sure. Yep.
All right, third quarter budget report.
Okay, well, let me introduce Liz, another Liz Lindrup. And she's been designated to work with Nowden, and with AEM, obviously. And they have put together the financial reports, and so it was kind of rushed. I pushed them to try to get something already in November, which I appreciate. And then there are a few things we're probably gonna, a few bugs that we need to work out. All good. I don't know if anybody has any questions, I turn it over to Liz.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I can walk you through, since you've probably never seen one of our reports again, or before.
Let me stop you on the first page there.
Yes.
The compilation report. second paragraph. Says, management has elected to omit substantially all of the disclosures and statements of cash flows required by accounting principles generally accepted. The omitted disclosures and statements of cash flows were included in the financial statements that might influence the user's conclusions about the city's financial position, results of operations, and cash flows. Accordingly, the financial statements are not designed for those who are not informed about such matters. Could you explain that paragraph?
That I cannot, I'm sorry. It's one of our standard, I think it is more, this isn't meant as your, like, financial statements for the year end. I can get back to you on that,
Yeah,
though.
if you would.
I have to apologize
It's
for
an ominous
that.
statement. That
Yeah.
We elected to omit substantially all the disclosures. It's like, wow, aren't we the jerks?
Yeah, so these are unaudited is also, one of the things
Yeah,
to,
it looked boilerplate, but I just,
Yep.
we're new at this. So.
yeah, nope, and I apologize. I will find out and get back to you.
We didn't want you to go home not
Without
educated.
a homework assignment.
Nope, that is fine.
We may be out here on the edge of the civilized world, but
Well, it's nice, a lot of people don't even read it, so. And I will, as Administrator Daris mentioned, we did sort of throw this, no, I shouldn't say throw it together, but as we were learning about your city, also putting this together, and I have already found one thing that was excluded, and I'll get to that when we get to that page. I'll kind of start with an overview on page 3 where it shows your cash and, or checking and investments. So this, it just sort of shows where you're at, as of the end of the quarter, your checking, cash in your checking account, which you have, 94,676, and compared to where you were at the end of the year, in the previous year. And that is pretty standard that you would have more towards December because you would have gotten that second, tax settlement. And then your investments, and you have recently opened, this year, the 4M fund. So that is what those investments represent. The $1,800,781. So we just kind of show this as a snapshot so you can see where your investments are at, where your checking's at. And then on page 4, we also, so the CTAs, I only had data for 17 and 18. As we're with the city longer and have more data, or we haven't had a chance to look at what your software was previous to 17. You'll have more of a history and you can see this cash balance and where you're at year over year. The solid line is the 50% reserve, and you can see you're well above that. And that 50% reserve is just so you have the funds as your tax settlements are twice per year.
so let, you don't mind to interrupt as you go along.
Yo, that is totally fine.
We had talked about, 50% is kind of the minimum. We were gonna go a little higher than that.
Okay.
So I'm assuming this is the default line.
Yes. So and the
We'll want to be known as having a little more reserve.
Yep, and we are still going through some of your policies. That would be something spelled out in your cash and investment policy and your fund reserve balance, where you as a council would like to set that at, and then that would be reflected in here as well. The standards, yeah, between 55 and I think like 65 to 70 a lot of cities have, so if you want more, we can set that based on your policy.
And, excuse me, do Linda and Joel, do you have this document? Are you following along?
I think there are some packets in the back. They're gone, okay.
This one is from the first agenda, and there's not another one.
Oh, okay.
I might have another one here.
We can share.
I've got another one here, Bob. Take the last page.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, Liz.
Yep, no problem. And then also at the end, if you have any questions,
So we're
just,
on page, that was page 4.
and if you have any questions just in general too at the end, especially with your 2 new council members. And since this is my first meeting here. Page 5, we just like to show a history and current of the different treasury yields, so you can see where those are at. Page 6 is where there is a correction. The budgeted transfers hadn't been entered into CTAS, so that is not in there for your transfers out in the bottom. So that should be 291,500. And then budget through September of 18 would have been 218,250. At this point, there hadn't been the full transfer made. I talked to Ellen, she made the full transfer for that first half, or I shouldn't say full, the first half transfer was made in October. So that has been taken care of since this. And then this is another place, like you mentioned, it's sort of boilerplate. If you wanted to adjust some of these parameters, our default is to explain any items that are expended less than 80% or greater than 120% and have a variance of $10,000. We can change that amount if you would like that changed, but that is our default. So we'll explain, and I've got them in there too, below if there's any items that you wanted more clarification on. I know, is it the Road and Bridge Administration was one where it looks like basically it's very under budget, that maybe that's some of the items we've been working with Bob on for budgeting, so that they're a little more accurate. Some of the CTAS, the way CTAS works with wages and payroll has created some variances from the budget. So that is one of the items we're working with for the 19. And then, so that was one that stuck out and we looked into, and is related to that. And your building permits, there is always kind of a lag, because you pay for your permit and then the invoice when they go to inspect. So that's why there's probably more of an expense versus revenue. Some of those could have been paid for in the previous year. So they don't necessarily always match up, where it does look like your planning and zoning variances are very close, your revenue you've brought in and fees versus expenditures.
What do you do on those in the permits? Because we've talked about that before with our building official, where the permits tend to lag. Something maybe was started in one year, ends in another. How do you normally address that? Do you just, the year it's paid in is where it goes in?
Yep, the year that the revenue is received, that's when it's recorded, because that's when the cash is received. It's, if you can, depending on what sort of development's going on in your city, if you know, for example, a large new housing development is gonna come in, you kind of know to expect you're gonna have larger expenditures because of the permits and revenues. So you can kind of base it off that and know, well, we might get 10 new homes. This is the rough estimate of a building permit, and we're gonna receive those, but we might not see the costs till later in the year, depending on a typical build. Out here, I believe, my understanding is you have more, not new developments, but people building on their land already. So if you kind of, as you see a trend in that, knowing how long it'll take from the time they pay for their permit to perhaps the build to be finished, then you can kind of offset a little, because typically the permits seem to go up more, in the spring and die down in the winter. So you can sort of estimate a little off of that, but it's not an exact science, because it depends on the economy too, if people are gonna do.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bettinger.
our building inspector is a contractor
Yep.
inspector, so he gets all his money up front. And
Okay.
so when he
So
collects
it's a
the
little-
money, he gets a percentage of that money collected. So if it takes him that building 5 years to get done, he's already paid
Okay.
upfront, so.
I wasn't sure how, cause I know in other cities, the resident will come in, pay for their permit, but cause there's a lot of the contracted building inspectors won't invoice until they've inspected. So, that'll be, thank you, good to know.
Oh, we could change that too.
You can change that. Make a note.
Yeah, if they never get around to building and they never inspect, he's already paid, so if it's something we wanna.
Gotcha.
And then they'll want a refund on the permit.
On page 7, we show your cash balances, and so most of these are to be expected. Your general fund cash balance will does tend to dip at this point of the year because you're expending more than you're bringing in because your settlement doesn't come until the end of the year for the second half. So that's on track. The other, same, I believe with your bond, or no, your fire engine, yeah, the same is with the bond statement, because of how typically we have sort of a best practices. When we get that first half tax settlement, we will allocate all of the capital transfers and any bond levy 50% in July and 50% in December, and then the remaining balance into your general fund, because you have to have those, you have to pay that bond. Typically, you want your capital transfers to happen as is, so you'll see that too, where your right now your bond funds will have a lower cash balance because that second half tax levy has not come in. And then the one other one that I sort of had stuck out was your building capital improvement fund. So that's a new fund, so that's why there's, obviously an increase. You had approved a transfer for funds into that. And then the same is the Pinnaker Lake Road. That is a new fund. You've incurred expenses but haven't had revenue come in yet, but you will in the future have revenues to offset that, so it won't be negative anymore. And then finally, we have your recycling fund, which sounds like you hadn't seen budgets for this before. So we compare, it looks, your revenues are currently down with your county aids and grants, and that's because, again, haven't received your second half. Sounds like the application went in. And then the big change in expenditures was really that capital outlay because of the down payment on the recycling center addition. And then we also show your revenues down below in a graph year over year. And like I said, as we get more history, we'll be able to add to that, and it gives a better picture. And then the second half is just your detail of all your revenues and expenditures for every fund, so you can have the detail back up. And this is one thing, sort of as our role then monthly, I'll be going through monthly too to review, looking for large variances, so we're on top of, different items. Sometimes it's just as simple as a miscoding, or I've had one city where they have a building inspector as city staff and was in an accident, so all of a sudden their building inspector expenses just went way up because they had to call in a contractor to fill in for him. So, just as an example.
So there on page 7 there, just real quick.
You bet.
The top one there, the item 802. Just for the record, it's Milestone Ponds.
Milestone, okay.
L instead of N.
I will correct that.
And then a question here on page 5, it says we got a budget summary. Attachment A is the detailed analysis. The cash balance summary is attachment B. And there's investment summary. Do we have investments? Because there's no item, there's no attachment C on here.
We do not have that, that didn't get included. But, yeah, I can get that to you. Sorry, I did not realize that was not in there, but yeah, that'll show, so the investment summary it'll show all your balances and ins and outs and interests in your investments and your checking account. So,
All right, that would be helpful. So just so you know, they watch closely.
that's good.
Typos.
And I do apologize, like, it did kind of, we were still learning about the city as we were putting it together.
We
but-
understand, we just,
But yeah, if anyone has any questions.
I just, I had a conversation today. Can we have in addition to the budget through, whatever time frame this is, 3/4 of the year, it seems to be sort of, reduced. Can we have the full budget as well? So there's, on the, interim financial report by code, by object code, so instead of the budget being reported as a 3/4 roughly of it, or in addition to that?
Yeah, let me look at, so those details are the canned reports out of CTAS, but I'll look and see, because that is how it came out.
Okay,
But there may be a way to get,
CTOP, yeah, you just gotta manually
Change.
change.
okay, and then it'll show. Because I was noticing it then pulled all of the expenses and then it doesn't tie to the reports. But I can play around with it.
Our page 9 through 26, those are all the city's CTAS financial statements, right?
Yep,
That's where you got your information, right?
yep, all from CTAS.
So CTAS provides you with all that, just a matter of interpreting that.
Yep, so yeah, that's kind of, we go through, we analyze it to make sure, and we'll be, like I said, I'll be going through monthly, but also then quarterly, the council, you'll all receive the report, just, for analysis. Make sure everything's on track.
And for the council's information, all those financial statements from 9 to 26 are already audited and rock solid for 9 months. If you can use that. Excuse my interruption.
have you met Mike?
I have not.
Mike is our auditor.
Nice to meet you. We'll be working with you probably for the audit.
I want to give you lots of information.
Yep, yeah, you can, through Ellen.
I hope they gave you everything that you needed.
I think so far.
Ellen's just going to email you something. A breakdown of receivables and payables. Wasn't much there.
Council have any additional questions for Liz at this time?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville?
I do have one question. On page 9 of the interim financial report,
So 9 of 26 or
9
just
of,
9?
page 9 of, which is page 1 of 26.
Okay,
So, very close to the bottom, total account 347. I'm just wondering if we are truly tracking correctly the monies that we've received for the rental of our softball fields, baseball fields, and splitting that from the concessions or not the concessions, excuse me, the shelters.
So the field rental versus concession sales?
And it's, we really don't do concessions, it's a shelter, we rent shelters. So it's the shelter and the picnic table. I mean, did we really only have $30 in ball field rent? And maybe we did, it seems like the fields are used a lot. Should there not be more?
Well, I was gonna say, just the church alone is doing more than that.
Yeah, that's what I mean, so how are those, maybe that's a question for Ellen, when those monies come in, how is she coding those?
Yep, and those are the types of things we can review. I know she has had a lot on her plate. So this is kind of, that'll be nice having us here, like on a second set of eyes. But we can pull the detail and look, and it's just a simple entry to change.
Okay.
We actually budgeted $18.75 for insufficient funds.
Again, that's the three-quarter thing, so.
So this budget is showing the 3/4.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a little confusing.
I was gonna say, they're pretty precise on that one.
If you can get an NSF for only $18.75, that's pretty good.
So we reserve the right to ask questions in the
Oh,
future.
that's fine.
Liz, are you gonna be at the next meeting for the truth and
That's-
taxation?
yep.
Okay,
Yep, I'll leave it.
all right, great.
All right. Bob, you wanna talk about wage study?
Yeah, I think it's a little out of order there, but towards the back of the packet, there's basically 3 employees that we have full-time. The first one is a street maintenance worker. And what I wanted to do is show you what I use for matches. This is cities of between, I think it was 3,000 and 7,000, so we're somewhere in the average of that, or 6,000, I can't exactly remember. And so you'll see those wages, and I think the street maintenance worker is probably the easiest worker to compare from city to city, because that job tends to be the same job almost for every city. Obviously, there's gonna be some differences if you have a bigger menu of public works activities, sewer, water, those kinds of things, the job sharing, and they're gonna do park work and all of those things. But the main thing you're trying to put together is a crew that can first plow the streets in the wintertime, and of course, maintain the streets the rest of the year. I'm not prepared for a recommendation, other than, as I'm looking at it, we're probably a little bit under for our one maintenance worker, full-time maintenance worker. Where we're at with our street supervisor is that I think we're kind of in the ballpark. He's at the high end of the range, you would say, after X number of years. But I'm not uncomfortable with that. I've heard a lot of people say that, people haven't had raises in a lot of years, so I think that is a function of probably that the wages, to a certain extent, have been somewhat competitive. And finally, with Helen's role, my understanding is she's still on probation, and but the wages there again are at the bottom of the range, and she's clearly starting from a relatively low experience, at least in cities, so there's a big learning curve. Again, I think there probably would be a recommendation for the first of the year for a slight increase. We don't have a salary range there, so I guess I wanted to put this information out there. The one thing I don't have I have it sitting on my desk as the actual hourly wages of them. I think it's approximately 19 for deputy clerk, 31 for public works or a street supervisor, and I don't remember what the maintenance worker is. So I wanted to put this information and then ask the question of the council, because it would be normal that we would have these kinds of things sort of set out in a process of wage steps. I know we don't have those. We don't have salary ranges, and then if you have those things, then it would be just done as a matter of job reviews at the end of the year, and if they meet those things, then they would be entitled to that next step. So, just wanted to kind of get the council's take on this thing, and then come back with a recommendation probably next month or at the first of the year.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bettinger.
we do have a compensation range for all of our positions, 2016. This is the, I'll ask if I can find my stack of papers. I'm purging things at home.
Well, this is 16.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that, and it hasn't changed. We haven't,
Okay. Okay. Can I keep this?
yes.
He's probably got a lot of other things you can keep. He's
Bring
purchased.
some back.
I forgot that you were closed on Monday, and I brought a few 300 binders and my goals over on Monday and dropped them off.
So on the codes here, you got FP, FLSA, match, union, license. What's an X? You got there, a Y and an N for union. What's the X?
Exempt, maybe? I don't know. I really don't. I haven't paid much attention to anything but the salary ranges in these reports, and of course, the size of the city, and, you know, some cities are notoriously higher paying cities, and some lower, although in these groups of cities, typically they're all about, they're kind of conservative. A lot of times the jobs are different, and you need to kind of match up that, but as far as those.
Yeah, so some of those, because match is one too. It's E, X, or G. I'm not sure what we're matching.
Yeah, I can find out, but
That'd help us analyze it a little bit. So. All right.
I mean, without direction, I guess I can come back with a suggestion. It's helpful to have this compensation range.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan.
I'm assuming it would be, it's time to put together year-end reviews. That certainly would be information to include in if adjustments would need to be made.
Yeah, typically you want to get the reviews in by the end of the year, and recommendations, and any wage increases would happen in the first year. I mean, some cities do it differently, but that's kind of how I've historically done it.
Yeah, it's one of the things we've always been challenged with, because when we're comparing the cities that have sewer and water and some of the other things, it does affect when we're mostly grading roads and cutting grass, so.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna impact the maintenance worker as much as the supervisor. I think the supervisor is definitely a role that you have to look at responsibilities relative to other cities when you
Yeah.
make these comparisons. I
Yeah.
definitely think that's the case. And deputy clerk, that's a tough one. And that's a different job almost in every city. But, you know, 'cause if you have utility billing often, then they're doing a lot of utility billing, or sometimes they'll work as code enforcement, or a variety of tasks, you work with the police department, there's different things in every city. So it's mostly, you know, under the city clerk and can handle the clerk's work in the clerk's absence. It's a handy role to have in the city and very important. And Ellen's doing, as far as I can see, a very good job, great. Works a lot of hours and it's really handled everything that's come along without a whole lot of difficulty, at least from my end of it.
So you can refine these, you'll.
Yeah, I'll come back
If the
with
codes mean anything significant,
Yeah, I'll try to figure that out.
there should be, I think, what do they call it, a legend of some sort somewhere.
That probably is, I just didn't include it.
All right?
Probably is a- Yep. All right, just a reminder, the truth and taxation at the next meeting, that's it.
Okay. Street projects.
Well, I
So,
will.
just a second, Randy, it's 1:45. Did you need to, is there anything you wanted to weigh in on if you have to go here?
I'll stick around to 9, but she'll just stay up a little later.
Okay, so is the street projects here? You okay with going to this next, or is it?
Yep.
Okay. All right, street projects.
Just a real quick introduction. The last meeting, you know, or the previous meetings, I should say, we've been talking about a fairly large project. We went through the kind of a rough analysis about what we could accomplish relative to the kinds of funds that we have available and what will be coming up. And authorized to sit down with Shane. We met a couple of times with Brad Schmidbauer.
That's correct.
With Metro Paving, and went through some things, and I'll turn it over to Shane. He's kind of laid out the project in a little more detail and a lot more specificity about what roads and kind of the cost. Here you go, Shane.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about some goals or objectives of this street project, and really one of the primary goals was to try to touch as many areas as possible for the lowest possible investment. And so, one of the things that we discussed with the contractor here in town is, you know, how do we do that? What would attract the most competitive pricing? And one of the things that we discussed was just making primarily a surfacing project. So for example, on Old Viking Boulevard, when we discussed that last year, we had some drainage items in there, such as some culvert additions and a little bit of ditch work. And so kind of this strategy kind of pulls that stuff out, and that some of that work would have to be done on the side led by Joe as a separate project. And then what we had discussed is that this project would just be really a very large surfacing project that would be very attractive to you know, paving contractors.
So with that, Shane, with that said, you know, we know the drainage issues on Old Viking. Do you have summarized on these other ones where you're looking just the overlay, how many of those types of drainage/culvert issues we might be looking at for Joe to do out of our normal budget? And where do we find that information?
I do not. So I think if the council is agreeable to this plan, that would probably be a next step for Joe to initiate. But that would be, or at least under this approach that Bob and I discussed with Joe and Brad present, that would be something that, you know, kind of be completed as a separate project by Joe or under his direction. Could be, you know, if they don't have time to do it, could be contracting with contractors to have that work done, but it kind of takes it out of the larger paving contract, and it also takes the cost associated with me being involved out of that picture, so.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that we're getting good evaluation, because we hate to put that kind of money into a road and say, well, we really didn't deal with the drainage issues or the ditch issues or the culvert issues, and this road's integrity is going to be compromised over the expected life of that overlay, especially when you're doing a full, the full reclaim, so.
Well, the one thing that we did try to do is to address the pavement, because the pavement is the critical thing. Sometimes you're gonna have drainage issues that either are larger than the scope of the project, or that would drive the cost in a way, you know, and if we can handle those things locally, so.
Well, I don't have a problem with having local, I just don't want them ignored, and then we do a nice, full reclaim, and
Yeah,
we don't have a 20-year integrity because we never got to the ditch. And Old Viking was one that there was some significant ones.
yeah, there were some, I saw some drainage things there. On the other hand, the roads themselves are, for the most part, there was a couple of major failures that I did see. I'm not sure that it was necessarily related to drainage, it might have been base or sub-base, you know, like that one cul-de-sac where towards the end of it is just a big depression, almost looks like a sinkhole.
Right, and that's in the Rogers Lake area. I
Yeah.
think that's more of a sub-base.
Probably is, it's probably trees buried down there.
But what, I guess what I'm saying is, if we want to hit the pavement, we're gonna have to, you know, try to make these projects be that the roads have held up, in some cases 20, 30 years, without it. They're not failing, so, I mean, the pavement is failing, it's not the base that's failing due to any kind of water. So I would say, if we don't correct everything, if we don't replace every culvert, that's something that hopefully, I mean, we'd want to replace any cross culvert. But driveway culverts in some cases, we may just have to not replace every little drainage problem that we come up with. And, because otherwise, I think the projects end up getting stalled like they have in the past. So if you can kind of realize we're mainly trying to solve the pavement issue and not every drainage and culvert issue, may help. And if it stalls it, stalls it, I guess.
I think one of the things that we've talked about with Joe in the past is, you know, when the original road study was done, we looked at all the roads, and we looked at ditches or lack of ditches and some of those things, just as part of the study, not necessarily where we're gonna remedy all of them. But I think that it would be good for us, as a long-term plan, to have worked into the road department a plan to deal with ditches, separate from this, but
Yeah.
something where we budget to maintain our ditches, to replace culverts as necessary, to
Yeah.
start dealing with some of these drainage issues. We got sod fields up here where there's no ditches, so, you know, the roads
Yeah.
are just, you know.
No, I totally agree, we need to be addressing those things.
So I think it needs to be
Both maintenance and
incorporated
sometimes project costs.
as part of our annual budget.
The only way today we'd be able to do it is we'd have to rent a backhoe at times, but it's a very doable thing, and I'm pretty sure Joe's a pretty good backhoe operator. I know he runs a side septic business, which is a lot of backhoe work. And I know he rents backhoes when he does that, so.
Most of these roads that are on this list, other than Old Viking, are probably 20 years or less old. They were built to engineered standards with ditches. So they really don't have the drainage issues on any of them, except Old Viking, when that was turned back from the county from 5 to 66 was just a simple overlay. They didn't fix any drainage issues. From 66 to 47, they did do some corrections on that, and that was more of a, like a reclaim overlay, so.
And I would
Put
agree.
a bridge in there too, which takes up.
And I'd agree with that. I mean, I've driven all these roads, and all the other roads have ditches. I mean, they, you know, I haven't driven them after like a snow belt like I did with Old Viking, this past spring. But, you know, I think one thing that we don't know is are the cross culverts rusted out? And that would be that would be an action item for Joel between now and springtime to look at that, determine, hey, how many of these cross culverts need to be replaced? And then that would have to be done ahead of the, you know, this contract, if this is ultimately the route that we choose. You know, for example, Watercrest is in here, and I don't know if there's too many cross culverts, but those driveway culverts are probably original, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And Jasper, you know, some of these older roads that are gravel roads that grew up over time and were paved at some point. I don't have any history of when those culverts were replaced, so some of them could be 20 or 30 or 40 years old, and that's about the life of a metal culvert, so.
Joel's replaced a lot of them.
Has he?
Yeah.
So he might already have a good feeling of,
And on Old Viking, he's replaced some of the cross culverts, a few of them, so.
okay.
Yeah, they actually used to have, and Joe used to have a map showing all the culverts that they replaced and where they had, and all the culvert locations.
Yeah, I've seen the map of the
Yeah.
culvert locations. I don't know if it has like a year though.
I think it is, I could be wrong. I know the gravel was color coded, so it's by year,
Oh, really?
yeah. So.
So with that being, stated, you know, so now we have, we're looking at potential project. You know, the task is trying to prioritize roads. We definitely don't have any shortage of roads that need repair. So, it wasn't a difficult task finding roads. It was more of a difficult finding determining which roads weren't good candidates for 2019. So a couple of roads that I thought weren't good candidates, you know, like 185th Avenue, Clifton Road, and 187th, kind of on the south end of Jasper there. You know, even though that's kind of a busier street with more traffic, you know, just at some point we have to draw the line, and with that potential road, that would be one of our future state aid routes. And at some point, we would have to do more extensive work to that road. So, you know, state aid standards vary on the traffic levels, but in general, we probably have to widen the road out to provide 4-foot shoulders, have a 4-to-1 in-slope, and, you know, do some dirt work with that. And so, even though I generally don't agree with, you know, waiting or putting off a road until a future funding source might be realized, especially when you don't know the timing of that, I think that makes more sense than putting off a road with no future funding source. So, for that reason, 185th, Clifton, 187th, and also Gypsy Valley and 213th were excluded from my recommendation. Another thing, or project area that I strongly considered was the Rogers Lake area. We've talked a lot about that in recent years. I know that the roads are in poor condition, but there are a couple of factors why I didn't think 2019 would be the right year to complete that road project. First, in order to get there, you have to come through another city's road. So if you come from the south, you're coming through Ramsey's portion. You come from the east, you're coming through Oak Grove. And if we're considering doing a project, we should really coordinate that project with either city. So, if it's not in their capital improvement plan, discussing with them, usually 2 or 3 years in advance, hey, we would like to do this project in X year, and trying to coordinate that project with them, so hopefully they would do a project at the same time. If they don't do a project at the same time, I'm concerned that running all of our construction equipment, the loaded trucks, over their section of road that's, already in pretty bad shape, could potentially make their road fail. And our project would cause a failure to their road. So I think it makes sense to delay that for at least as long as we can, until we can coordinate.
Or we could speed theirs up by saying, we're gonna ruin your road, so maybe you wanna fix it now.
I know Oak Grove was overlaid their piece already.
Yeah, I saw that,
And
yeah.
and I think Ramsey has too. It was a few years ago.
The Oak Grove piece definitely looks
No.
newer than the Ramsey piece.
Yeah, I'd say Ramsey's, seems like it's in pretty poor shape.
Yeah, and I know I reached out to Ramsey, I don't know, I lose track of which years I've looked at this, but one of the studies, we did kind of a sub, or, a little focus area on Rogers Lake. I know I reached out to the Ramsey city engineer at the time, and they didn't have it in their capital improvement plan. So I could do that again, but it'd be nice also, at the same time, if we had a capital improvement plan that identified which year we wanted to do that project.
Well, we should be looking down there on the Ramsey side with ercium and uranium too,
Right.
those short little areas. When are they planning on doing the roads that lead up to that? 'Cause we're kind of in the middle of the block there we started.
Right.
So let me ask just quickly before you go any further here. So we've got the recommended streets here. And there's a lot more streets in this in our street study. And at one time, we were looking at $3 million to do everything. And here we're doing a limited number for $2 million. Have we really moved the scale that much to, if we were to redo that road study that we've done, the road plan that we have, how many million would it actually take these days to do all the work that you propose? Because we always had that kind of $3 million to do everything, and now we're talking probably,
It's more than 3 million.
Yeah, it would be more than 3 million.
And Rogers Lake would be another million.
Right. Yep. But, as every year that we're not able to do a road project, our roads degrade even more and it increases the cost, so.
Well, and that's kind of to the point that I have made, that usually the cost of constructing these roads isn't, it seems to be outpacing inflation a bit. And because it's so dependent on contractors, so by the sound of it, if that wasn't that many years ago, it would have been wise to do it. It would have been a good investment, of course. And that's kind of to the point of trying to take $2 million and say, look, if you can borrow money at 2.5%, does anybody think inflation for road projects is going to be less than that? I don't. And then you also benefit from packaging a number of projects becomes more attractive, and the contractors get competitive. So-
and not to distract us from this, but just my question, I guess, in context then, if at one point all of our roads were 3 million, and we got 2 million to just do these, not saying it'll impact what we decide here, but how much is left?
It's quite a bit.
Are we talking $6 million?
Well, and I think it's hard to state how much is left because, roads continue to age, and so roads that don't need a lot of maintenance, for instance, if we were to pave a new road today, that wouldn't be, considered left, today because it's brand new, but in 10 or 12 years, it might need some maintenance, and in 15 or 18 years, it might need an overlay. And so, in addition to these roads, I mean, we still have a lot of newer roads in the Milestone Ponds development and the Bailey Estates and Quiet Meadows, Autumn Acre. I mean, a lot of these roads aren't that new any longer. They were constructed in 2004, and they're gonna be coming up on 20 years, and they're really not even, at the time of the study, the recommendation was probably a seal coat. And those are gonna be moving from a seal coat to a overlay fairly soon, and if we're not able to do an overlay, they might move into the reclaim and pave portion, and so it's
I'm not fighting, I'm just saying that we need to have a reality check saying this is something, we're gonna need $2 million a year for 2 years.
It's gonna be hard to pull off a couple million a year. But if we do 2 million a year, then it'll be easier to handle some of the other projects as we go. And the theory of this is take a big jump, try to hit our worst roads, and then we're close to where you need to be to kind of stay up with it. Otherwise, we're really behind.
No,
I'm just trying-
we are behind,
Yeah,
right today.
we are really behind, and so if you do Pinnaker Estates, we really haven't made any progress on that. We need to take a number of those roads and get it, and it's just kind of an action orientation that we need, a mindset that we need to kind of get to in order to accomplish some of this. And so it's a pretty big jump. I don't know if you're comfortable with it. It's gonna take a lot of work too. It's gonna take a lot of public hearings for, improvement hearings.
Right.
And they're not all that much fun.
No, we can't afford to do 2 million a year for the next few years. You'd have to raise taxes a lot.
You could do another $2 million project, but then that would pretty well exhaust the road funding that we have. But that would be probably 2 years down the road, 2-3 years down the road. Because a lot of this funding is gonna come from as debt comes off. So we still have roughly 300,000 in the road fund.
As the debt comes off from equipment and stuff, but
Yes.
there's also some deficiencies there.
Oh,
We got
I'm
a,
not, yeah,
that's another issue we got.
right,
Yeah.
and
So you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul, but,
I'm not robbing from anybody.
well, if,
I'm suggesting that we not delay any longer our road improvements. And I do recognize that there's other issues that will come up, including equipment, and I'm a believer in good equipment. Because it's an emergency service that we're generally running with our snowplows. But this is in front of us today. It's been in front of us a long time. Our equipment isn't nearly this deficient. At the same time, my life gets a lot easier if you say, Bob, we don't want to do it.
We're not gonna let you off that easy.
Because I can tell you, we're gonna do, recommend that we do neighborhood meetings. Both Shane and I have had good success with that, not together, but when we talked about it, it's a way to try to anticipate the kinds of issues that are gonna be coming up and collect the residents' concerns before a public hearing to go council. Council will be invited to those as their public information meetings, but not public council.
So question then, so you've got the 2019 tentative schedule. So you're looking for us to order feasibility reports. So you're looking for everything that is on page 2 and 3? Or what are you,
Yeah, and I mean, I think even just because we're having this discussion now at the workshop, I think in order for the feasibility report to be ordered this month, you'd have to have a special meeting, or it'd have to be delayed until the December meeting.
But we can order here.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
So
It's a
that,
public meeting.
okay. Well then, yeah, I mean, the idea is in order to, and this is already a tight schedule for assessment projects. It's going to be a little bit difficult for my office to turn around some of these things this quick, and in some cases, that's okay, because we're not gonna have public improvement hearings for all these projects on the same night. We might stagger them out by a couple of weeks. And that's kind of how I would try to, if you ordered feasibility reports tonight, I would get as many of them done as possible for your December 11th meeting, or whatever. We might have some special meetings also if we're gonna get this done under this timeline, so we could set a couple of special meeting dates also. Well, then kind of package, I don't know if you'd rather package up projects kind of by project area or by type. I mean, does it make sense to do Old Viking and Jasper at similar?
Jasper not gonna be a state aid road?
Jasper will be a stated road.
So that one you're including, but not other state aid potential roads. But why that one and not others?
Just the condition of the road, the Jasper has, the transverse cracks are settled and it's pretty rough when you ride it, and it also is starting to get some pavement that's, breaking up. So that's something that, both Brad mentioned when he drove the roads, and Joe had mentioned before, and that Jasper was previously identified as an overlay. And now we think that the overlay is, is probably past that point, and now it's recommended for a full depth reclamation, so.
Mr. Mayor?
Not a lot of houses on that road either. Councilmember Rainville.
Well, the concern I have when we talk about the state aid, we're a long way from that. And so, to wait for that, I think is not wise. I mean, I looked at the building, the new homes that have gone in over the last 5 years, I think it was, and what we would need in homes at three occupants for homes and 4 occupants for homes. And it's in the area of 200 plus homes for us to get up to the 5,000 population. That's a lot of homes for Nowden. I mean, in that 5 years, we didn't have anything close to that. And so, if we can figure out how to do it now, I think it's smarter of us to do it now. Because I just think those funds are a long way away. I mean,
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
There's no question.
yeah,
Old Viking would be a future state aid route too.
but
It's just,
it could be 10 years,
right,
I mean,
right.
possible.
Could be longer.
It could be longer, oh, for sure. I mean, 10 may be
Could we get-
very optimistic.
Well, and who
About
knows
10
what the
houses a
state's
year?
gonna do with state aid
And
roads.
state, well, that's the other thing, you never know if that's gonna continue.
Nothing ever changes at the state.
Oh, heavens, no.
Well, the state aid tax, I mean, I think it's constitutionally,
It's in the Constitution.
right, so it's,
5,000.
right,
But
it's,
but for us to get to 5,000, it's a long way away.
It's not easy, and especially
Yeah.
with the plans that, you want to remain rural. I mean, it sort of gets it. There may be an area of town that you decide you want to have a little more density with that as a strategy, because the dollars are close to what you're setting aside for your annual road fund. So it sort of doubles your capacity almost immediately. Now, there's a design end of it that tends to gobble it up a little faster per mile, but it's not an insignificant amount of money. And a strategy may make some sense. it's gotta meet the interest and the expectations of your residents, obviously.
So should we as a council then move forward with this and order the preparation of feasibility
That's the
reports 4,
recommendation.
2, and 3? I move that the council orders preparation of feasibility reports for the projects listed on page 2 and page 3 of the November 1st letter provided by our city engineer Shane Nelson.
Any other discussion? I will say the tentative schedule, you said it's a little loose anyway, but January 3rd is probably not the best week to have a special meeting, including hearings.
But, we can refine that and that's
Push
the way
that
it's
out at least a week, but
But the main thing we're trying to work backwards from is March bid opening.
Right, that's
That's critical.
hard.
Right, and there are, statutory notice
Yeah.
timelines, and then there's also there's quite a bit of work for my office to do in order to package this all up and get it out for bids, and so trying to allow my office enough time to actually do our work as well as meet the noticing requirements. There's a little bit of wiggle room, but it's like within a week, one way or the other, it's pretty tight.
The other thing, we're gonna have to bring in Ellers here pretty quick too. I know that before you order projects, there's some things in order to refund the bonds and things like that. So, yeah, it'll be a challenge, no question about it.
And one thing for the council to keep in mind is not all these projects, ordering the feasibility study is the first step. But we really don't know how the neighborhood feels about the improvement until we
Yeah.
invite them in for the public improvement hearing. And sometimes if there's a lot of opposition, it just doesn't make sense to go forward with the project. So even though
I agree.
even though it's listed on the schedule, it's still, things may still change slightly.
And the feasibility studies for these aren't that complex, are they? For overlays?
No, they're not. I think most of the Old Viking, we already did a feasibility study
Yeah, we got
for an
all that
overlay,
done.
but we'll have to update the numbers. The challenging part is if there's in a per unit assessment method, which I think we've discussed before and.
Well, we're gonna get on that a little later.
Right, yeah, maybe I'll just save that
Yeah.
discussion until it's appropriate, so.
Yeah. I don't think we called that question.
No.
we did have a second?
Yeah.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
So the assessment policy is the next question, and the one thing that I think, the Pinnaker Estates was around $29.60 for an assessment, and as people have come in, they've let us know how unpopular that was. I'm sure you guys have already heard some of that. My own experience is that there's a balance between, the amount of assessment and the popularity of it, and it's important to try to strike that balance to the extent that we can. I kind of like the idea of a $2,900 range. You get beyond that and it starts to really, really hurt. I throw that out as an option. It makes it a lot simpler. Assessment policies are inevitably very, very difficult. Things because of frontages, corner lots, things like that, you're gonna run into a lot of things. But if in theory you can kind of say, well, the average individual kind of uses their property on the road the same way, and for, so the amount of trucks and garbage hauling and delivery trucks is about the same, whether they have 500 feet of frontage or not. They're driving down the full extent of the road. Are we comfortable with the unit assessment, number one? Because I've heard that Old Viking, was gonna pay half of that, and there's just not the frontage to do that. On a road like that, typically it's a little more expensive. I think you're thinking the section of bituminous is gonna be real similar to the other residential roads, or would it be thicker?
Well, for Old Viking, we would want to, have a geotechnical firm come in and do some cores and maybe a boring or two.
We don't have that?
We do not have that. Last year, we were considering doing an overlay, and so for that, it's not needed.
Okay.
But that will help inform us of the required section.
Well, the understanding was, after we talked about it, it's one of the things that raised the prices, is the overlay was not the best long-term solution.
No.
And so
We typically have the same thickness, the same standard for all our roads, whether it's a through
Not a
road.
collector, not a difference between collector and resident?
No,
Okay. At any rate, that's an argument then for sort of standardizing what that would be. And if you can kind of imagine as this policy and these road projects start to become more a part of the fabric of the community and understanding is, well, they did it last year, about the same price. In other words, the residents start to understand, and pretty soon the hearings are, well, I guess it's our turn.
we had a hearing for Old Viking already with,
Well, you need it again.
right, and I understand that, but they were told at that point in time it was 50-50, they would pay half, and actually the people, I think in Old Viking didn't seem to have a problem with it at all. It was more the Pinnaker Lake.
Pinnaker, yeah, which is a much smaller.
Yeah, I don't know what 50-50 it would be.
But that was with the overlay cost too, not the full.
Just an overlay, yeah.
Yeah.
It'd probably be closer to $6,000, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
Because it was $4,100 for just the overlay.
and that was a unit?
Correct.
How many units on Old Viking?
It was like 67 or,
Yeah, that sounds about right.
it's a couple more now.
Well, it really is a balance, and if you're okay with that, it just makes it much more difficult, and potentially more roads are just gonna be rejected by the residences. I don't know how you do Rogers Lake in a 50-50, might be really pretty,
Well, we said it might not always be 50-50.
oh, okay.
We've not said it's just, that's where we were starting, but
The
that wasn't.
rough,
Attorney said, don't establish policy.
But they're gonna hear if you start doing one at 50-50 and you try to do something else differently, they're all gonna want.
yeah, I'm an advocate for a standardization of roughly what it costs, and, you know, because then the people that have mill and overlay are gonna come in and say, well, yeah, if you would have fixed ours on a timely basis, it wouldn't have cost us as much. And it's a pretty good argument.
It's gonna be an easier sell if it was a flat.
Yes, and find a
Per household.
fee, a flat fee that you can, because, you know, I guess I believe that you want to be fixing roads for lots of reasons. Obviously, it's the city responsibility, but, you know, the idea that, okay, if you're really against this, then you would eventually see the gravel or the asphalt road become a gravel road. And that's a pretty extreme consequence. And the other thing is, I believe there's a property value component to this that sort of is underappreciated. You know, I may be wrong, but I think people need to hear that. The city's big responsibility of the roads is, you know, it's easy to sort of say, well, the residents gotta pay this much, and otherwise we're backing off, and at 6,000, that's really high for that. I just haven't worked with that kind of an assessment before for fixing a road. For installing roads, I've seen it high as that. So that's just a forecast. If you put it up at 50 and we're gonna run into $6,000 assessments, we're gonna bump heads with people in a major way. And that's a council call. It's not our role.
Makes your money go further, that's, I mean, they want the low taxes out here, and if you want the large lots, you're gonna have to, there's a cost associated with that.
I understand. Maybe then we need to have, some of the projects that, well, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. It might not be a $2 million project, it's the end of it.
Right, and in my experience, a lot of municipalities treat their collector roads a little bit differently because they are getting more traffic than just the local residents. And so, I mean, you know, for our neighborhoods over in Rolling Oaks and even Watercrest and Krypton Street, you know, there it's just the local residents and their delivery drivers and their guests that are driving on their roads. On Old Viking and Jasper, you know, it's not just the people that directly front onto those roads. It's a bigger group, and that could be justification for increase in the city percentage. But as I agree with Bob, it's a council call, and it's, you know, this is something
Yeah, to be
that,
comfortable with.
Well, as a township, we used to 100% assess, and we have done quite a few of them. And everybody wasn't happy, but when the project was done and they had a nice product, then later on, then they were,
For fixing asphalt roads?
yes.
Not heard that. But, yeah, I can see where that is completely unsustainable, that policy. I can see from a township point of view where you might, you know, it's not a lot of projects that townships are typically doing like that. So, you know, it's hard. I've worked with townships a little bit. But cities have to start to have a procedure that they're willing to do that's gonna hit the sweet spot between the council, you know, concerns about affordability and the residents' concerns about I guess the same thing, affordability. I believe. And, you know, eventually, too, the practical issue is one of assessment challenges. And, you know, as that price creeps up, and especially it was really, really difficult in the 2008 and later, where property values are going down, many cities abandoned assessments altogether. With the idea either you're paying it for the taxes or assessments, and it kind of comes out of the wash. It would be hard to do that today now without a big tax increase. So our recommendation would be more of a unit assessment. I agree with Shane, we would probably recommend that you look at collector roads very differently. They're gonna see through routes of gravel hauling, heavy, you know, they get pounded more than those local residential streets. Most cities do treat those differently.
But they get state aid.
Not all of them. And the state aid standard, of course, is a lot higher in terms of cost of construction. You won't get all the collector roads, well, you know that. You know, we get a percentage, what is it, 20%, something like that.
One of the things we talked about with Old Viking, we were gonna go with 22-foot lane width. And if you've driven that, you notice there's a lot of places on the bends where the people are driving off the shoulder, off the asphalt onto the shoulder. We've got some significant ruts on that. And I don't know if we can do something to build up the shoulders, or in some areas where you're on a bend like that, if you can widen the lane there. But if you take a look, there's places where people just aren't staying on the road. And you catch that in the wintertime, you're gonna
Maintenance crew filled that in,
get a ton.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess my recommendation, like, again, would be probably to hold off on doing any kind of earthwork on Old Viking, just because, you know, at some point, it might be 20 years from now, but, at some point, we're gonna have to widen that road anyways to meet state aid standards, so if it's 22 feet now, we're gonna widen it by 4 feet on each side to get a minimum of 4-foot shoulders, so, you know, 8 feet in total. And that's gonna be more of a major road project, and it doesn't make sense to, we'll pay a lot more if we do it twice, if we do some of the widening now and some of it at a later date, so.
And that should be something where we're staying on top of any shouldering that needs to be done, so.
Sure. So I do need, some direction for preparing the feasibility reports. The per unit.
Assessment policy.
Right. The per unit assessment method, and I think I'm not hearing any opposition to that. But then also the cost participation,
Yeah.
is another big factor that,
So if we ran a project, let's just say if we ran a project, we did it 50/50, the numbers come back, residents going, no, not for that amount. I'm assuming that could be adjusted at some point if we're out of stuff or we end up not having any projects to do. Right? We could come back and change the numbers around?
Probably next year, maybe not in time to.
Right, might make it, but it's like, okay, this is what we're offering now, this is what we can get done. If you don't wanna do it now, then we'll just loop you around for the next time. Right?
yeah, and I mean, just to remind the council of the process, we prepare the feasibility report. That informs the council of, you know, the approximate project costs, a possible assessment amount. And then we invite the residents in for the public improvement hearing. That's the first time we hear from the neighborhoods on how they feel about the project. They usually tell us how they feel about the proposed assessment amount also. But we actually don't determine the assessment amount until a later hearing. And so we could, you know, based on comments heard at the public improvement hearing, revise what the actual assessment amount is.
So if that's the case.
Can you adjust the percentage at that point? And right now, you're talking about the public improvement hearing in early January. According to this tentative schedule.
With the bidding, we wanna, if we're gonna jump into this, we gotta really keep mindful of that March deadline, because otherwise, you can almost guarantee, you never know, but prices tend to go up past that. Rather be bidding earlier than that.
Right, if we end up opening bids in, say, June instead of March, I would say, I would probably adjust my estimates by at least 10, if not 15%. Just because I know the bids are gonna come in higher that time of year than they would in March.
So think about that, 10%, we worry about a 2% bond, 10 or 15%, just like that, and I've seen it, you just go, why didn't we bid this sooner? So if we're gonna do it, we gotta be kinda all in and decide we wanna be bidding in March, because otherwise we're gonna know what's gonna happen if we're bidding in later than that.
So I'll make a motion to go with a 50/50 split for the proposals.
Second.
Any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Is it gonna be a unit?
Unit. Everybody agree with the unit?
No. There's a price to pay for big open space.
Yep.
Old Viking we did, that was 50-50, and then we had that development to the south, we did quarter and then down there.
Yes, I
They
think we did.
didn't have full access on it,
That was
Right.
yeah.
West Ford Brook to the north.
Yep.
So do we want to then? with
But it
that
says here,
schedule-
scheduled neighborhood meetings, what
Yeah.
exactly are we?
Well, like I said, we would want to,
We need feasibility studies first, right?
oh, yeah, but, you know, as Shane gets close to finishing those, we're gonna, I mean, I guess I want to have the neighborhood meeting in advance, or when would you normally have that, Shane?
I had neighborhood meetings in like July and August this year for a project that we were considering.
For this coming year?
Right.
Yeah.
So ideally, we'd have more time and we could start them earlier, but, you know, I think,
We almost need the feasibility study though first, correct? Before the neighborhood meeting?
yeah, I mean, it's certainly helpful. I've done them several times without, just, you know, I've done them several times without
Yeah, okay.
the feasibility study. And just, you know, there's not a lot of information available, but it's just, we are considering doing a road project, and, you know, this is about the overall project cost.
The worst case scenario.
Right,
kinda.
are there any things, you know, is there anything that we should know or we should be aware of as we're studying the feasibility of this? And, you know, I've had residents before at those neighborhood meetings say, this drainage is really bad, we really think you need to add some drainage improvements to the project, and later incorporated those, but. It is kinda hard to fit them in just because of the condensed schedule, you know, and the holidays coming in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't there some holiday or something coming up?
And ice fishing.
Comp plan.
Kind of plan, yeah.
Kids didn't know what you were signing up for, did you?
Alright, so, do we wanna look at neighborhood meetings right now or not?
I don't think you're gonna have time for it.
It's a lot of neighborhoods.
Okay.
So then, the next thing on the tentative schedule, we've got the January 3rd special meeting. Do we wanna pick another date right now versus the 3rd? That's a lot of people's
Well,
special vacation.
we can update at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Wait,
Probably
okay.
more reasonable, say the 10th, but
Yeah.
a week later, but
Okay,
still early January.
okay.
Right, and more than likely, we're gonna wanna select a couple of dates, if not 3 or 4. I mean, it really depends on how many public improvement hearings you wanna have in one night.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough to have.
Well, we have two.
I don't see a problem.
You might just come back for entertainment.
Well, actually, one of the neighborhoods is mine, so I'll be sitting out there.
You'll be nice to us though, won't you, Randy?
Oh, yes. I've seen how this works.
It's a lot easier on that side.
Yeah. Yeah, I can always get pissed off and just go over to the bar.
Yeah. We might be following you.
And potentially, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 project areas.
Some of them are small enough, you could package a few in.
Right, you can easily do 3 a
Three.
night, maybe 4, but I don't know if you could do 5 and 4, you know, that'd be tough, especially with a couple of the ones with the larger properties, you know.
Just a question here, if you're doing Jasper and you're doing Ebony and Garnett, wouldn't you be doing 189th and 190th? You got one U-shaped street there that either has to go out to Jasper or has to go out to Ebony,
Yeah, those roads are,
and they're not,
they're in tough shape.
just,
They were a thinner section when 185th and Jasper was done, that was the first roads that we put 3.5 inches on.
Okay,
And I think, so them two, I think they only have probably 2 inches,
okay.
so they should be done.
you're talking 189th and 190th?
What's that?
189th and 190th?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're doing everything into them, and then you're gonna come back and do those later, this would be a time to get those done.
Okay. We probably need a motion to order a feasibility report for that project area also.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
moved?
Okay, and we did vote on the other one? Okay. And could someone explain what we're ordering there? I know the feasibility, what street?
We're talking about, I can't see anything, 189th
Okay,
and 190th, and it's the one in between the two.
Yeah, what's the north-south road?
You got a park on there,
Yeah.
Dolomite,
Dolomite.
Dolomite?
yeah.
And who seconded this?
Dan.
Randy and Dan both.
Okay,
It was a tie.
all right. Okay. We need a vote on that one.
Any other discussion on that? So we've got, there's no other streets there, it's just a cul-de-sac down to 189th. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Skid loader quotes, someone would like to see an additional quote, and so why we pull that. By the way, the price went up $2,250 because we missed the deadline, so get another quote on another track machine. And I don't think they use a skid loader a lot all the time, I don't know, you probably have a better handle.
Some for plowing snow in the parking lots and stuff,
But we have other rigs.
but them prices, I don't think you have to get quotes, because that's state contract, you can just go get it.
Right, but other machines.
Oh, different brands.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
you're right, that is state contract.
Yeah.
Is there just, and this was one Cat model, I mean, I'm assuming Cat's got a bunch of models on the state bid.
Yeah. I'm not the wrong guy, I've never owned a skid loader, I can hardly drive them. But, we'll get them, quote another model. Usually Cat's more expensive, and usually Public Works likes Cat. And it's just what I've experienced.
They typically have a better resale when you trade them back ends,
Yeah. Provided the frame's not broke, right?
or rusted out, yeah.
All
And
right,
then the quote there, I meant to take that off, that.
yeah, we've got that on the
covered
other.
that already.
All right, it's not quite 8:30, Randy, but anything else in the workshop?
Do we have comp plan meetings?
Yes.
January?
Sure you're gonna push that off? We could do it, we have a real light P and Z meeting, road and bridge is also canceled next week, but. Could also.
What do you got on the P and Z night?
Just one, the Ward subdivision that was on last month, is coming back redesigned.
So what do you want to cover in this
For the W lot.
comp plan one?
Yeah,
Well-
Dan, yep,
Oh, and Dan.
yeah.
Okay.
We have to talk about
So he knows about that meeting next week.
options.
You should,
You
yeah.
know, I propose 3 options for.
There's two of them, there's one in the morning and one at night.
Oh, really?
Relax to address the annexation area, and then how, we treat the rest of the cities. really what we need to talk about. And then also that commercial, industrial
Well,
expansion.
so right now, just to clarify, we have a 5 acre average on platted areas. I'm not sure all of our P and Z members understand that yet. but- And because because of some of the things that came up during the election, people with 5 acres are saying, oh, we have 2.5 acres, so they're asking for 2 houses on their lot now. I say, you got 5 acres, you got 1 house. If you're in a platted area, then you can average that. This guy gets 2.5, this guy gets 7.5. You can average your 5. So nobody's going under 2.5 at this point.
Right.
So there are some parcels for sale in platted areas that are under 2.5.
Parcels for sale in unplatted areas. There are definitely smaller parcels that have been split a long, long time ago. Right.
Or they were 2.5 acres to the middle of the road. So when they go to sell them, they're actually not 2.5 acres. There's quite a few of them.
So the question is, right now, we've got an agreement with the property over on the east side of the city that they can go down to 2 acres, no less. You're saying you want to allow that, are you asking, do we want to allow that anywhere else in the city?
That's the magic question, is how do we control,
And at this point, the only place we're obligated to do that is where we've agreed to do it, because there's a settlement in place.
correct,
But no place else is there that agreement. The other discussion was that if there are those that were smaller than that, well, second, I guess, the first question, in the agreed upon area, we were talking about what 2 acres actually means. Because right now, we include, is that 2 acres buildable, is that 2 acres of highland, is that 2 acres, it's gonna be platted, so it's not to the middle of the road.
right.
So we need to define what 2 acres means in that area. And then have the discussion, does this apply to anywhere else in the city?
Well, I think we need to, yes, we can talk about that generally, but we need to define our land use. Whether it's 2 acres, or whether it's 2.5, or whether it's 5, it's still all considered rural residential. So you're right in saying that it's really the zoning that is gonna define how this area gets built. We could create a new zoning district. We could do it all by plan unit development, as Morton Farm has done.
By the way, what is the density on Morton Farm? They've got the 40 acres that are set aside.
Yeah, we've
And they've
got,
got how many acres are developed?
they've got
Do you remember,
40
Andy?
acres developed at about 1 acre lots,
I think it was 80 total.
and 80 total, acreage.
So what do we got, 17 homes in that, 18 homes in that area?
Yeah, max of 20, I think.
Yeah, that's about that.
So on 80 acres, we would normally have 16.
He got a couple extra for the PUD, so that he would do it.
Right, but I'm just saying that if they had the 5 acre average on 80 acres, they would have 16 homes.
Yeah.
Right.
And he has 18 or 20, I mean, there's a couple that kind of coming in from 47 there, I don't know if that's part of the planned unit or not. But let's say he's got 18 homes instead of 16 or 20, we can count them.
Right.
There are a few extra in there, but people don't realize that density is still not far off from what we have over the rest of the city because of the set-aside land. So they're still averaging 4+ in that area.
And right, the trade-off was the open space preservation. And the way our plan unit development district is geared right now, it's based on that Anoka County designation of special biological areas. So we would have to amend that PUD to make it usable in other areas of the city, which isn't a big deal. Or we create a different zoning district for the 2-acre size. You know, one way to control the development, if we want to allow it to be applicable elsewhere, would be that the land has to be contiguous to the annexation area. We don't have to allow it outside of the annexation area at all. Or we allow it where it will, kind of like development has been, just where people are ready to sell and subdivide. But under the 2-acre district or designation, I would definitely suggest, you know, referring to it as an open space district. We would ask for amenities, more amenities than are required now. That would be the recommendation, or the trade-off for the added density, similar to what was done in Morton.
Or the settlement area.
Right. Yeah,
You would ask for more amenities in the settlement area? Okay.
right.
Yeah, I was talking with the mayor of Rogers, and that's what they're doing. They're, you know, stone face, 3-car garage, minimum foundation. They
Well, I
have,
think you're talking open space amenities, all right?
Well,
Or no, or it's
we're
actually.
talking
well,
both.
both, yeah, it's
Both.
both.
Okay,
Yeah, quality of the homes as
Okay.
well as
I see.
parks, trails, buffers along the main roads, you know, so we kind of.
So if we were at this point to propose that it sticks right to the settlement area and the amenities as far as environmental and architectural, could you put something together for the 27th on that?
Sure, I mean, yeah, I can get some, definitely examples of ordinances. I could make a bullet list of types of, you know, materials, you know, just kind of what I see out there in different cities, right?
And then define what that 2 acres is, because we're not going to the middle of the road
Right.
and what, is it buildable 2 acres, is it including wetlands, is it?
Exactly, and we may have to change things like our lot width for that designation and all sorts of different things. So,
I think that's what people are gonna wanna hear first, and then you have to see what the pressure is to say, if this applies else, outside of that district at all, those same conditions have to apply. Because, and that's one of the things we talked about, if it's gonna apply elsewhere, you have to apply those conditions universally. And so if you're gonna have extra amenities, and somebody has a platted area that they've got this smaller lot that they're stuck with, well, they're gonna have a nice house in that smaller lot. But at this point, we'd have to see, you know, the people I've talked with are not interested in opening up to 2 acres around the city yet.
that's what you gathered from the majority of residents?
All
I will say,
2 acres.
the only one that even was hesitated, I wasn't quite sure to read, was up in Morton Farm. And just saying, you don't like our small lots. And I said, you got your average. You're almost, you're not quite 5, but that was the condition of the PUD. But you can't forget that 40 acres over there is part of this average.
Right, exactly.
And so, but that's the only one that I wasn't quite sure how to read it, just saying you probably don't like it up here because you want the bigger lots. But yeah, I generally didn't bring it up. They brought it up to me, and everybody I talked to going home to home. That's why we moved out here. And the concern was, especially for those areas where people had asked for smaller lots in the middle of the city, you know, the concern was, are you going to allow that? So, again, that's why we're having the workshops and open houses, and
Right.
people can weigh in on it. But I think we start with saying that we made an agreement with this 550 acres, portion of it is commercial, that isn't, how is that going to be zoned? And then if it's contained in there, start with that. If people demand contiguous, you know?
Right.
Because I think the next thing people are gonna want is to know where the commercial and where any other potential senior-type transitional thing may come someday, so.
Right, I mean, we do have to weigh some of the comments we heard from developers to people that are retiring and want to sell.
Yep.
Obviously, their land is worth more at 2 acres. But I agree, I mean, from what I've heard too, most of the people that have 5 or 10 acres just want to stay that way.
One other thing that's relevant to our earlier discussion is it costs more for road projects on the larger lots, and so I understand that.
Well, and that's one of the things, you know, and certainly Randy's brought that up repeatedly, you know, over the years. And so I, you know, it's one of the things I bring up with people, it's more costly.
Right.
If you've got this much frontage and you're trying to maintain this road, you don't have a whole lot of people to share that cost with you. And in the vacuum that we're in right now, they're saying that's great. When you start doing the assessments, that tune may change. But right now, without the assessments, without those costs being felt, they're saying they want the larger lots. Now, I've heard other cities that are bragging their open lots, they got, you know, 2.5 acres, and they're talking about the huge open lots. Heck, you take a look at Ramsey's statement, you know, you take a look at their latest newsletter, and that's one of the things that Kurt Ulrich said, people move out to Ramsey for the wide open spaces and the large lots. So it's relative. No.
Yeah, I'm sure Liz can verify every city wants that.
Yeah, everything.
You know, I mean, it's just what you hear, right? I mean, Corcoran, St. Michael, Hanover, all of these cities are, the residents want that. It's really tough, long-term to deliver.
Development's gonna come whether you want it or not. The key is to controlling it in a way that makes sense. Because it is not financially feasible right now for these people to split up 5 acres, a 40-acre piece into 5 acres, and put all that road in.
Yeah.
They can't make anything, which is why we don't have any lots available right now.
Well, ironically, the big acreage that we do have available is split into 2 or 3 home sites. You know, we had 92 acres and it went into 2 families. We had all that acreage up on Norris Lake that went in, there's 3 houses on it. We had 100+ acres, so. There are people that want that acreage and they're willing to buy it up and live there for now because they got horses and they got.
Right.
But yeah, you know, that's what, you know, that's gonna be the balancing act going forward. And when you start assessing road work, that may be part of what changes people. The other thing is the population ages, they wanna still live out here. You know, maintaining a large home on 5 acres is getting more difficult.
Well, one option could be to designate areas, and, you know, one could be in the southeast and one could be in the southwest, adjacent to those communities that have smaller lots.
Better watch the northeast, because we have a developer that's buying a bunch more of the Boys Ranch.
It's so wet up there, there's not much you can do with that.
Right, but their city sewer is right there. It's right there. So that could be another possible annexation someday.
Well, I'm just telling you that other than extending up north from Morton Farm, hardly anything in there is developable. There's a couple of small pieces that, Volunteers is splitting right now that abuts their campus, but it's pretty limited,
Why is it?
just with wetlands.
It's wet.
Yeah,
But
so wet.
there's quite a bit of high around there too.
Yeah, take a look at it,
It's
Ray.
Across north.
I know it, I've lived in the area my whole life, I know it very well.
I'm just going by the National Wetlands Inventory, and, you know, we don't have any delineation yet.
Yeah, there's the Mud Lake and something around that his dad actually owned that. His dad's passed away now, but there's a lot of low there, and he was talking about adding on to the Morton Farm Preserve someday and doing another PUD. So there'd be a lot of open space there, but where Junior's buying now is, it goes Oak Grove, part of it's in St. Francis, some of it's in Nelson. There's a lot of developable land up there. And if you wanted to bring in city sewer, be very high density homes. And it's right there.
Maybe so. The other thing is, these 2-acre lot areas, well, I have two questions. Yeah, one would be about allowing for further splits into 1 acres long-term. One option is requiring people to put their homes on one side or the other. You know, whether we require it or whether we leave it as an option. Because if they're smart enough to think about it long-term, I mean, anyway, that would be a sewer and water issue way, way, way down the road, but, is there any gut feeling right now whether you like the PUD or whether you'd rather establish something very definitive, like another zoning district? Because PUD, you have a little more flexibility.
In what way?
Pardon me?
What type of flexibility you're talking about?
Just meaning, it's basically a case-by-case basis where you can negotiate versus having the zoning district establishing all the parameters down to the last itty-bitty thing, and then that's the way it is.
I think that area though, he's gonna wanna stick a house on every 2 acres he can. And he's not just gonna give us a bunch of open space.
Well, I mean, you can,
So a PUD probably isn't gonna work. If he just openly agrees to it, yes, great, but I don't know he would do that.
well, you could still establish parameters and percentages of, for your park dedication and that kind of thing, but,
It's
It'd
normally,
be a heck
normally
of
when
a
you
lot-
do them things, it's a give and take. Okay, if you want this from me, you want some open space, or you want some park, or you want this, I want more houses, I want more lots, and then he's the one.
Yeah, you're gonna start negotiating.
Yeah, and I don't think you wanna go there. I think it's better to do, define zoning area, and it's 2 acres minimum. He's gotta meet all the buildability standards, so some of his lots aren't good, they're gonna be a lot bigger than that, because there is some low ground and stuff, and
right. I agree, I think the zoning district would.
You know that?
I know that farm very well. It's tiled.
Yeah.
I think the gut that you're hearing is, zone it.
All right.
Do we want to schedule anything other than the 27th?
I was just gonna ask, so doing a comp meeting on the 27th?
Yeah,
Is that okay? We do a P and Z meeting
quick.
first, real quick, and then do a joint meeting
On the 27th.
on the 27th?
My daughter's not gonna be happy with me.
That's the last.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A little late.
A little late.
Do we want a motion on that meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Do we also want to talk about combining the December workshop and council meeting?
Oh, yeah, we probably should.
Okay, so I move we combine the Thursday, December 6th with the Tuesday, December 11th meetings.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And do we want to schedule another comp meeting in December?
I don't know, what do you think? The holidays,
I think you're pushing it.
All right. And I move to adjourn. You want to meet, I'll adjourn. A second to that?
I'll second, meeting adjourned.